Hi everyone, it's Kelly Beatty coming to you live from the Chelmsford Senior Center for the continuation of the fall annual town meeting and also a special town meeting that is going to be held at the beginning, right as we get started here tonight. Now, those of you who were here back in October probably remember back on October 20th, we started this town meeting, and ordinarily by November, mid-November, we would have been long done with that. Well, not so this year. This is a very unusual year for lots and lots of reasons. What really has triggered this very long delay is the fact that an audit this past fall turned up the fact that the school department was about $500,000 in the red, something that certainly no one had anticipated when our budget was passed last spring. That compounded with the fact that some of the bills that the school department has paid this year were actually bills from last fiscal year. It's been very, very messy. It's involved all levels of the town government, and we're going to iron that all out tonight. The reason for the delay until tonight is that we needed to make sure we knew how much free cash we had. So, to start, we're going to have a special town meeting involving four warrant articles. And Town moderator John Curlin is starting that right now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I have to remind everyone where the fire exits are. We have two to the right on the wall, on the exterior wall to the right, two in the exterior wall to the left, and there's a fire exit to the rear of the building. Also, if you have to leave the meeting early, would you kindly drop off your electronic voting devices with the checkers at the front hall? At this point, if we're ready, Ted, we will check the electronic voting devices, and I will declare a quorum. So as soon as the screen is ready. Again, 1 is an affirmative vote, 2 is a negative vote, and 3 is an abstention. So please vote now. You have 32 seconds left.
This is Kelly Beatty again. We're going to be tackling 4 special town meeting warrant articles, and then moving on to about a half a dozen articles left over from the first session of the regular session of the annual fall town meeting. Most of those will have to do with free cash and how that money will be apportioned. The recommendation from a tri-board meeting of just a week or so ago was to take about $1.1 million from free cash and use that to offset the school department's deficit for fiscal 14.
Tonight we have a special town meeting, which if we get through all of the matters at the special town meeting, we will then go straight into the continued town meeting from last month. There are a list of individuals who require your approval before they can be permitted to address town meeting. I will read the list and call for a vote. Frank Antonelli, who's the Chelmsford Public School consultant. He's a resident of Dunstable. Anne Marie Fiore, who's the Director of Technology, who's a resident of Methuen. And Mike Maccaro, who is the attorney for the school committee, and he's a resident of Quincy. So all in favor of permitting these individuals to speak before town meeting, please just raise your card. That's all we need. Passes. I have reviewed the return of service on special town meeting, and I, for the record, will declare that it fully complies with all of the requirements of law. At this point, I'd like to turn over the special town meeting to the town manager.
Good evening, everyone. The first article on the special town meeting warrant pertains to the payment of prior year fiscal bills, and in this case, it's prior year fiscal bills of the school department. After the close of the fall annual town meeting warrant, a couple of months ago, the town accountant brought to the attention of myself and members of the school committee and other financial officials of the town that she was in receipt of bills that were incurred and invoiced in the prior fiscal year. Under the provisions of Massachusetts general laws, payment of prior year fiscal bills requires an authorization and an appropriation by town meeting. We then went to our town council, John Giorgio, who's presiding this evening up on the stage, and asked for his guidance regarding the components of that unpayment of unpaid bills, because the statute is one that we rarely invoke here in the town of Chelmsford, but like most statutes, you kind of have to read the detailed language. And what council explained to us, and we'll explain to you if asked for further elaboration, is the fact that certain unpaid bills require different majorities of vote. That in a general standard, if there's a prior year bill of which there's no appropriation available at the time that the services were incurred, that requires a 9/10 vote, because in essence there was no authorization, legal authorization to make payment on that bill. And then obviously you can see that that's a very high threshold. However, there are other instances under the statute that if the unpaid bills pertain to a governmental entity, such as a special education collaborative in this instance, that the statute only provides a simple majority provision for that vote. And then there's another part in the statute is that if the services that were incurred, there was an appropriation and a purchase order and such at the time, then in essence it wasn't by virtue of a unavailable appropriation, and so therefore it requires only a majority vote. So what we're going to have under this article, at the direction of council who helped in the drafting of this article, are 3 motions and 3 votes. And the bottom line with all of these motions under this article, it should not be lost on the fact that goods and services were delivered and provided for, and in essence we're of the essence of providing for the services of the school operation. So the bottom line is there were no inappropriate purchases made, and many of the vendors, and you'll see them listed, are vendors that we regularly do business with and continue to do business with. And so it's a unanimous agreement amongst the selectmen, the finance committee, myself as manager, the school committee, that we pay these vendors, because in essence they ought not to be penalized for basically delivering services in good faith to the community. So with that as intro, the first payment would be for the payment of $22,158 to make a payment to the Crest Collaborative, and an additional $80,035.41 to pay bills from the Merrimack Special Education Collaborative. And then it's hard to read in your handout, it's even hard here on the screen. You can see that these services were delivered during the previous fiscal year, and they do pertain to special education collaboratives. And so therefore, as manager who presents budgetary articles, I would ask your support to make payment to these vendors. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Town Manager. Now is the time for question and answer. This is an opportunity for anyone who has any questions regarding this warrant article to approach the microphone and make inquiry.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. I may ask this question often tonight. Could you please explain why they were not paid in fiscal year 2014 and what the school department is doing so this does not happen in the future? What preventative actions take so that each year we are not in this position again?
Mr. Moderator, I think that question can best be answered by a representative of the Chelmsford School Department, and Dr. Frank Tiano is making his way to the podium.
Thank you for the question. In terms of the bills that were not paid in FY14, that matter currently is under investigation. And we are in the process of putting that investigation, bringing it to its conclusion, and sharing that with the school committee, and sharing that abroad at an appropriate time. Under advice of counsel, we would not be sharing that here this evening. Second part of the question, in terms of how we will ensure that that will not happen again. As you folks know, we have working with us a consultant. His name is Frank Antonelli. His name was mentioned previously. And also provided by the Board of Selectmen, we have had a forensic auditor with us for several weeks and had provided information to the tri-board as well as the school committee individually in subcommittees. And we've been working diligently with town accountant, town treasurer, all of the boards working cooperatively in terms of looking at ways in which we can prevent this from happening again. One of the main parts of the audit from Mr. Sullivan, who is the forensic auditor, his audit is in two parts. The first part is the financial piece and looking at all of our numbers. He's looked from FY12 through FY15. He's done his trend analysis and has been able to provide us with concrete numbers from which to work. Second part of his audit will be more of a managerial piece and looking at the flow, looking at the transactional pieces of our business office, not only as they flow within our department, but also to how they flow to the town offices and back. Already significant progress has been made in those particular areas. I was chatting with several members from the town before the meeting and looking at the last month in terms of how things have gone, putting in internal controls in place regarding the utilization of munis, and looking at in terms of putting together internal controls. Again, working with our consultant, we've been looking at our PO system, putting in measures so that PO accounts cannot be overridden. We've centralized the signing of the purchase orders and bringing that into the office of the business manager. We've been under close scrutiny our payroll encumbrances and using that for forecasting not only till the end of FY15, but also to putting that in place for our budget projections going forward. Scrutinizing the warrants closely is the task of our school committee along with our business office, and working on more comprehensive reports and training in terms of working with our school committee jointly with our administration. One of the key things that we've been doing for the last 2 months is reconciling with the town on a monthly basis. We've had several meetings with the town accountant regarding doing that. And that process, we feel comfortable going forward that will be ensuring that we will not be in this position again. Having access to what the town sees in munis is something that the school department has not had. And again, through cooperation with the town, being able to see what they see in real time in terms of journal entries is important. And also to a revision of the chart of accounts. School department and the town have two different chart of accounts. And so when we make a journal entry, that'll show up immediately on the town side. That's what you're talking about in terms of putting those internal controls together real time in terms of the action that's taken place. And I believe that answers the second part of your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andy Sillage, Precinct 7. This will be just a short question. If you take the monies on this first of the three, add them all together, 1, 2, and 3, what are you going to have the 141,000 as the total?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Maria Carafellis, Precinct 2. I'm not going to bother yelling and screaming or anything and trying to point fingers and lay blame. All I want to know, out of that $22,000 and then that $80,000, what does that represent? Is that a month's worth of invoices? Is that 6 months? Is that a quarter? I'd like to know what I'm paying for. I know we have to do it, but I'd just like to know what it is. And
The town accountant has informed me that it's 1 month.
that's
of
1 month?
services.
All right, thank you.
Maureen Foley, Precinct 5. Thank you very much for breaking this down so that I know that these are sped bills. And I've noticed on the handout that I got in the mail on page 5, after the school committee has agreed, near the bottom, second to the bottom, circuit breaker, the school committee has used $165,000, and they have remaining $500,000, and it is my understanding, and I want to make sure I understand this right, that circuit breaker funds can only be used for special education bills. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the answer is yes.
Okay, and so I suppose my ultimate question is why are we not using part of the $500,000 that remains from last year, which does not include what we anticipate getting this year? Why are we not using part of that to pay these bills?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the financial officials of the town, which I'd basically say are the finance committee, the town manager, finance director, accountant, school committee, and board of selectmen, we looked at this funding situation, of which this article for the unpaid bills and the subsequent article that's coming up on the fall annual town meeting regarding the supplemental appropriation to the school department as part of Article 4 in its entirety. And it was agreed that we believe that there should be a sufficient cushion, in this instance $500,000, to meet unforeseen expenditures. The primary concern would be special education expenditures, and also there'll be an additional $210,000 of school choice monies that will come in this year to meet unforeseen issues that can arise, as historically has been the case in other fiscal years. We are only in November of a school year that's going to go till June, and as you can imagine, life will happen. Expenses and issues are going to arise that weren't foreseen. To go to the question, well, why not use that money for this article? Well, one is money is fungible, so in essence, it can go, the money used here, they've got a $50 million budget and so forth. At the end of the day, there's going to be a cushion, but more importantly, we need an authorization to pay prior year bills. So the school committee could not on its own make payment for prior year bills without a town meeting vote. So that being the case, we're coming to the town meeting, seeking that authorization and using free cash with the full consent and knowledge to the community that there will be a cushion, as has historically been the case, to meet the needs of the school department through the remainder of this school year.
Mr. Moderator, to follow up with my previous question, it was stated that the attorneys advised them not to present the information of the root cause tonight.
That's not what was said, Ms. Logan. What was said was that the forensic report has not complete and they don't have all that information yet.
So is the town paying for that forensic report, and when will it be presented to town meeting?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, when we get to Article 4 of the fall annual town meeting, upon the conclusion of the special town meeting, you will see a request for $18,000 supplemental appropriation to the general government administrative expense budget to meet the cost of the forensic audit. We believe that audit will be completed within the next few weeks.
I'd like to ask the second question again. When will it be presented to town meeting?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the earliest we, at this point, leaving here this evening or this week, that we have a town meeting scheduled will be next April at the 2015 spring annual town meeting. What I think you'll see well before then, and probably as soon as next month, and certainly by January at the latest, will be discussion of these findings at a tri-board meeting, meaning a joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen, School Committee, and Finance Committee, which takes place at the school administrative offices. That meeting will be publicly posted, the agenda will be notified, and the community can either attend and or watch the results of that meeting. So that will go to the community as a whole. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, question possibly to the council. In these three articles that I see here, there isn't the almost $800,000 that was either paid by someone by check without an appropriation and without authorization of town meeting. What is the total amount that was inappropriately paid?
Mr. Latina, I think that you're assuming some information that has not been established yet, that those expenditures were not appropriated properly. If you want to rephrase the question so that you're merely asking without arguing, where is that $800,000 going to be paid, that certainly is a permissible question.
My question is, how much are we authorizing and how much appropriation does town meeting need to do? Is it this amount on these sheets, or is it another 800,000 some odd dollars?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, it's the amount you're being requested and authorizing is the amounts on these sheets. Bills that were a prior fiscal year that were paid in July, those payments are done. They've been paid. And if your question was, should they have been paid? The answer is no, they should not have been. But that's water under the bridge at this point. All we can do at this point is, these are bills that have not been paid, that surfaced later. It was basically the end of the summer, early September, and therefore they were held, and that's what we need authorization to do this evening.
As a follow-up, Mr. Moderator, when will town meeting authorize and appropriate funds that were paid inappropriately, that were not authorized by town meeting? When will we do that? When will town meeting authorize that? Not at this meeting, I guess.
I believe that the town manager said that they've paid those bills already.
That's not the question. When are we going to authorize them?
No, they've already been paid.
Right.
So we can't authorize or unauthorize bills that have been paid. I will defer to town council, but that's my understanding.
That's correct. So if we inadvertently pay a bill, if a town employee pays a bill and it is not authorized by town meeting, it's just too bad?
Well, there's a budget process, Mr. Latina, and in that budget process, we authorize a certain amount of money to be expended. It is up to, in this case, the school committee to determine how they spend the money.
I thought town meeting authorized and appropriated funds, no one else.
We authorize the town manager who has a budget, and he designates how much money is going to be paid to the school department, and the school committee, in conjunction with the superintendent, determines how those funds are going to be paid. We, as a town meeting, do not say you can hire 10 teachers or an assistant superintendent. We don't do that. We just authorize them to expend X dollars. And once those funds are expended, if you're not happy with the way that they've been expended, then there's other recourse. But right now, our function is to address a current problem, which is there's a shortfall of, there's bills that had not been paid that should have been paid, and we have to address that problem.
I understand that. I guess maybe town council can answer my appropriation and authorization question. Will we ever authorize and or appropriate the money that was not authorized and not appropriated by town meeting, to the point that in 2015 we're short $800,000 that we authorized and appropriated in 2015, not 2014? Do you understand my question?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker. Once a bill is paid, it's paid, and there's no going back on that. Now, I don't know whether maybe the town manager can answer this question, but on the fall town meeting warrant, which is going to come up after the special is concluded, there is a transfer of $700 and something thousand into the school budget. That will be dealt with at the adjourned session of the fall town meeting. So that may be, I'm not sure if that's your question, but that money will be appropriated to
2015?
It's being appropriated in 2015 to meet the 2015 expenses of the school department.
Thank you.
Chris Bowman, Precinct 4. I have a couple questions. First is, are the town reps going to receive a copy of the finalized forensic audit report?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the report is not available yet. We have received a spreadsheet analysis that was presented and discussed amongst the boards of selectmen, school committee, and finance committee. That spreadsheet is available for review. Once we get the forensic audit, we will put that on our town website as well, and then the town meeting reps and anybody in the community can review that document.
Okay, so it seems like the answer to that question is no.
No, I believe
So-
the answer was yes.
No, I'm sorry. I asked if each town rep is going to receive a copy of the report. What I didn't say and should have said, through the mail, a hard copy. So the answer to that is no, but what you said is it's going to be on the town website. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr.
Is that
Moderator.
correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. We have no
So-
plans to mail the forensic audit report to all the town meeting reps.
Okay, my follow-up question is, are the town reps by mail going to receive a notice of when that finalized forensic audit report has been completed, so then we know that when we go to the town website, we'll be able to find it?
Through you, Mr. Moderator. We've not made any plans to do that as well, and let me explain why. If one looks at the Charter of Responsibility of Town Meeting Representatives, there's an obligation of one to be a town meeting representative to keep themselves informed of the issues, finances, and other matters of the community. It's clear, given the nature of this issue, that once this report is available, it will be widely known throughout the community that this report is available, both through the print media, through the town's website, through discussion at board levels from the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and School Committee. We've not made it a practice of the town to mail such documents or those matters to the town meeting representatives. We feel, it's my understanding, Ben, is that really that the representatives have a responsibility, as specified in the charter, to keep themselves apprised of the information. And again, we will do our best to make sure that both the town meeting representatives as well as all the citizens of the community are aware when this information is available.
Okay, so the answer to that question is also no.
Ms.
However-
Bowman, really, hold on, please. At our last meeting, you were arguing, you're starting to argue now. If you have a question, ask the question, do not make a comment. You can make comments during debate, but not during question and answer.
The comment is for clarity.
No, the answer was very clear. People understand the difference between yes and no.
Not necessarily. I'm sorry. However, the reason I am asking for that notice is because it was clear from the town manager's response to another question earlier that there is uncertainty as to when that report will be available. Excuse me, I am talking. Please be quiet.
Well, now,
So-
look, Ms. Bowman, we are a respectful meeting here. We don't talk to other town meeting reps in the way that you just spoke to that one. The comment from the other one may not have been appropriate, but I'll address that myself.
Okay.
If you have a question, certainly ask it at this time.
Okay.
But please try not to editorialize.
Given the severity of the situation that necessitated the special town meeting concerning the fiscal
Problems.
process of the school department and the special forensic audit report by the town in order to investigate this fully and completely so that the same thing does not happen again, wouldn't it be prudent and helpful for the town to send out one piece of paper to the town reps by mail to inform them when the finalized forensic report has been completed?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, what would actually be more cost-effective and more timely would be if all the town meeting reps would submit their email address, if they have one, to the town clerk's office or the manager's office, so that we could send that information free of charge and quickly. And for those who do not have email address, we'll be glad to send a written notice, but I don't think there would be that many that do not have an email address.
That would be very acceptable, and I thank you for that. I had another question. If you give me one moment, I'll see if I can find it.
Or if you want, you can wait till the person behind you and get back in line.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Dave McLaughlin, Precinct 6. Is the $141,000 an amount of money that was budgeted in fiscal 14, but is being asked to be paid in fiscal 15?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the answer is no.
So it was not budgeted in
no.
fiscal 14?
That's correct.
Thank you.
The funding is coming from our certified free cash at the close of fiscal 14.
Second question, school committee, why was it not budgeted in fiscal 14? Is there an answer?
Again, my name is Frank Antonelli. I'm the consultant with the school department in the business office. Basically, the reason why it was not budgeted is because the budget practices were not really accurate. The budgets, as we've looked over the years at the actual expenses, are not keeping track with the expenses. So we're under budgeting in a lot of areas. And as the superintendent mentioned a little bit earlier, we are going to do an excellent job of providing a detailed budget to the school committee and to the town for fiscal year 16. So we will have a very detailed budget, and we will make sure that something of this nature does not occur again. Thank you.
Jerry Lowe, Precinct 9, I think. Can't remember. Is that right?
It already says on your badge.
Or does it? There you go. My question is, I'm a little confused. Are we tonight in these articles or in the regular meeting voting to allocate money for whatever you want to call it, the $700,000 or $800,000 before we understand the audit report? Is that audit report going to come out after we vote the money at some time in the future? So we've, on faith, said that audit report's going to show us everything we'd ever want to know, and so tonight we can vote the money to move over to the newer budget?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the forensic accountant has completed the work of review of the finances for the past fiscal year and also for the current fiscal year. The accountant does not believe that there are any additional unpaid bills or any unknowns to the best of their knowledge. The actual report itself has not been completed. What we had, as I mentioned earlier, is we had a detailed spreadsheet that went back 2 fiscal years and also included the last fiscal year and the current fiscal year. That is available, and that is the basis of which we're making our requests. But the actual final report is not available and will not be available until the auditor, forensic accountant, completes his work, and that will be, as I said, in a few weeks.
And will part of that report be good accounting practices that show how it can be avoided in the future, and why this wasn't found out much earlier, so that it could be addressed earlier before it was such a big amount?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, as was noted earlier, there are a number of initiatives that are being taken to address those concerns. One is the work of the forensic auditor. The other is the assistance of the school committee's consultant. The other is going to be coming in from the Association of School Business Officials that will be asked to come in later. So there'll be a series of initiatives undertaken in order to improve the practices to prevent such an instance from occurring in the future. But obviously at this point in time, those are not complete. What we do have, and why we asked for the 4-week delay, in the actions of the fall town meeting is we do have a handle on the financial condition and what is needed to pay the prior year unpaid bills and also to complete the current fiscal year operations.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Bowman, Precinct 4. I remembered my other question. My question is, does the town know how we're going to be paying for this forensic audit that is being done, and do we have any idea of the invoice that we're going to be presented with?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, the engagement for the forensic auditor is $18,000, and under Article 4 of the adjourned session of the annual town meeting, which we believe will take place later this evening, that we'll be asking for that appropriation so that we can continue to operate and fund the operations of municipal administration. Why it was done that way is the cost for the annual town audit, which was completed and was presented to the Board of Selectmen last Monday evening. That report is available, is complete. That's funded through the accountant office because it's an audit of all town departments through the town accountant who processes payroll and invoices for all town departments. So therefore, the forensic audit in this instance was also funded through that office. So yes, we know the amount, it's $18,000. We're going to ask for a supplemental appropriation for this extraordinary expense later this evening.
Okay, so as I understand what you just said, that covers the phase 1 that was already done. Does that include the second phase of the larger scope concerning the management of the finances and the flow and how that's being done, or is that going to be treated separately?
No, the $18,000 will pay for all the services of the forensic auditor. As was noted earlier, the school committee has a consultant that's being paid from the school department's budget to assist them in the office. Right. And then they'll also be receiving some services from the School Business Association.
Thank you very much.
Jerry Mead, Precinct 6. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to the presenter. Of the $141,000 represented in the 3 motions, is any of that penalty for late payment or interest?
No.
Thank you.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, I think it goes to the presenter. Getting back to our budget here, I understand Merrimack Special Education is for special education, which is over $80,000. I'm curious on the CREST Collaborative, is that also from special education?
Yes.
Okay.
It's another provider.
Having said that is yes. These unpaid bills are unexpected, correct? That's unexpected that they were not paid, correct?
Right, they should have been paid during the last fiscal year.
Correct, okay. So getting back to circuit breaker, for unexpected bills for special education, why is this $102,193.41 not coming out of the $500,000? I understand about the buffer, however, by your definition, this is unexpected.
Mm-hmm. I think I answered that question earlier. The bottom line is the town meeting authorization is needed in order to pay those bills. And we felt that the best way to make this request was to fund it through free cash. The school committee has the authority to spend circuit breaker money without town meeting appropriation under normal circumstances. That those monies are received, they're in a revolving fund, and they're expended during the course of the year. We felt this was the best way to proceed.
I understood that part that you explained. However, it requiring town meeting, there's no reason why that could not have been offered up, the circuit breaker, instead of pulling everything out of free cash. Why was there not an amendment put into this meeting so we could vote for that particular portion of the funds to come from the circuit breaker?
Well, you could file an amendment.
You could file an amendment.
If you chose to do so, and we would vote on that amendment. If you want to file an amendment that the $122,158 be paid out of circuit breaker, you certainly can, and we would vote on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Laura Merrill, District 2. A couple of questions. You indicated, town manager indicated that there was a town audit that was submitted last week, and I just want to know, is the town audit not typically look at the school budget in detail, like how was this missed, if we already have another audit going on? So what detail level is the town audit looking at the school's budget?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, it was a result of the town's audit that this problem was surfaced. There was a town auditor who in August, in his review of prior fiscal year as well as the initial bill payments for the current fiscal year, who noticed the issue that's at hand, the $780,000 inappropriate payment of prior year bills in the current fiscal year. So I think it clearly reveals that, yes, the town audit firm has done a very competent job and does look at the detailed expenditures of town departments. And as I said, in this instance, it's what's brought this issue to the surface.
Okay, thank you. And you also indicated that in addition to the $18,000 that we were spending for the current audit, that there would be other experts coming in to review our process, the school committee's expert and the state expert. Are there additional funds expected for those people to come in throughout the process?
As I noted earlier, you heard from the school department's consultant this evening. That consultant is being paid from the school department's operating budget. So the answer to your question is yes. The work from the School Business Association, I don't believe will have a fee to my knowledge at this point. But yes, charges are being incurred through the school operating budget for the use of its consultant, and that has been factored into the overall budget request for the school operations through the remainder of this fiscal year.
Is there a line item number for that consultant's money? Does anyone from the school department have that number?
I can't give you the exact number because I haven't memorized it, but I can tell you that those expenses will come from the account that is related to the business manager's salary.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. Quick question on a previous question which may lead to an amendment. Are we allowed as town meeting to instruct the school committee to spend money out of their discretionary fund of that $500,000?
Actually, I'm going to defer to town council. That was just what we were talking about.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, the circuit breaker is a fund that is expended at the discretion of the school committee. It is not, in my opinion, an available appropriation at town meeting. So you could certainly request that the school department use circuit breaker money to pay for the special education bills, but that would not be binding. And whether or not they would do that, I can't answer that question. So I think, if you want to get these bills paid, unless there's some representation from the school committee that they would use circuit breaker funds, town meeting cannot designate that as a funding source through an appropriation.
Thank you.
David Foley, Precinct 5. Through the moderator to the presenter. The forensic audit report, is that report running behind schedule, or is it known that it wouldn't be available until 2 or 3 weeks from now?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, we believe it's on schedule. What we tasked the forensic auditor to do was to address the issue of the financial number that we need to finish this fiscal year. because we realized we had a town meeting coming up, and the latest date that we could push this town meeting in order to get our tax rate approved and bills out is this evening. So that was his first task. He's now completed his field work, and he's back in the office completing the other analysis. So that is on schedule. But it was never anticipated that we would have the full report for this evening's town meeting.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Andy Sillage, Precinct 7. The increase in the costs in 2014, are they mostly due to additional services or increased per hour costs to us?
If you can answer that question.
It's my understanding those were due to additional services, is that there were no notable increases that basically said, oh, we're getting the same level, they're just costing us more. It was basically bills surfaced that weren't paid within the fiscal year. Perhaps if they were recognized earlier, other expenses could have been curtailed that would have allowed it to come into budget, but when they're not identified, you don't have that constraint. So again, we don't believe it's because of an increase in services. We realized that in the managing of their $50 million appropriation and also about $15 million in revolving and other activities, that these just weren't recognized in the system and therefore were not encumbered or otherwise paid in a timely manner.
Thank you.
Laura Merrill, District 2. One last question. Does the school committee have the authorization to use the funds from the circuit breaker to pay these bills if they are not granted funding from free cash this evening?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, and I'll stand corrected by town council if necessary. My understanding is if the school committee wanted to pay these unpaid bills by way of their circuit breaker account, they would still need a town meeting authorization to make that payment because it's a prior year unpaid bill. So as town council noted earlier, town meeting cannot appropriate the circuit breaker fund, but they would need authorization to pay a prior year bill, and that would be their discretion to use that funding source.
And as a follow-up to that response, how would they bring that to town meeting in a timely manner if we did not vote that through this evening?
In essence, it could be done under this article, and in essence, what would be sought would be an authorization, but not an appropriation. Again, the law specifies the fact that you need an authorization to pay prior year bills. So regardless of the funding source, so whether it be circuit breaker or what have you, they need town meeting authorization to pay a prior year bill, whether they would use a revolving fund or what have you. That is a necessary component. And again, what we're asking for is free cash as an appropriation. If they wish to pay it from the circuit breaker monies, they could do that, but they could not do that until there was authorization from town meeting to make that payment.
Thank you.
Tricia Duras, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, through you to any representative of the school department. Just looking ahead in our handout under the school department's presentation, I noticed that in FY15 they have an anticipated amount in circuit breaker money of $2,373,957,000. And I'm just wondering, with the buffer of $500,000, why the school department feels that they need to keep that buffer if they've got another anticipated $2.3 million coming in.
That $2.3 million is already encumbered. We have projected expenses for that, for just about all of it, except for about $20,000.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any more questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Finance Committee unanimously recommends this article.
Do the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Does the School Committee have a recommendation?
The school committee has not taken a vote on this article. We will make our statements during the debate.
Okay, fair enough. Now is the time for discussion. Anyone who is a town meeting rep or a citizen can discuss the issue if you have any discussion.
Dave Dubinsky, Precinct 2. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to anyone who would like to address the question. What I haven't heard so far from anyone is addressing the issue of accountability. Having been retired from a 20-year healthcare management career in the private sector, when a situation like this presented itself, I saw a CFO and the Director of Financial Operations and his underling summarily dismissed.
Mr. Dudinsky, with all due respect, that is not an appropriate argument for this Warren article, okay? I understand that there's a lot of emotion and anger and questions regarding the overriding issue of which this is a part. The issue regarding personnel, the issue regarding accountability, the issue of how we got here and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again are not really issues for town meeting. They are issues for the school committee. And certainly I would respectfully suggest that if you wish to make what you're starting to make as an argument before the school committee, you certainly have an opportunity to do so. However, this is not a meeting where we point fingers or cast blame or talk about personnel issues. We're really talking about a funding source and how we address that problem. So if you can confine your discussion to that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to my second question.
Oh, you have a question?
Yes.
That's fine.
So in the report from Melanson Heath, there's a sentence that says the amount of over expenditure in that account has gone from $163,746 in 2002 related to special education expenditures to $884,376 in the following year from 2002 to 2003 with an expected expenditure of over $1 million in 2014, which is the fiscal year we're discussing to resolve right now. Since all of this relates to expenditures that were either unforeseen or mismanaged, however you want to phrase it, what in the world are we doing to make sure that the special education piece, which was cited in the report as being the major driver of this situation, what are we doing to prevent this from happening again?
That would be an appropriate question.
Next year's budget is going to be a lot different than this year's budget. What we saw in many accounts, and you've highlighted one of them in the auditor's report, is that the budget was just not keeping up with the expenses. In a case like that, we will be going back over a couple of years, and we will be saying what was spent. We will make a complete list of all special ed students, where they're going, what school they're attending, what the daily rate is, what the extension rate is, what the summer school rate is. And we will put all of those purchase orders in the system from the very beginning of the fiscal year, and we will monitor those very closely. That's what we'll do in order to prevent that from happening again.
My name is Alan Thomas from Precinct 5, also a member of the school committee. As we deal with the articles tonight that deal with school funding, some of us are angry, some are disappointed, others are confused. Chelmsford has an excellent school system. Our teachers are dedicated and hardworking. Our students are talented and well-motivated. This tradition of pride in our schools has been built up over generations. I'm proud of our school system, and you should be too. Tonight, we need to appropriate funds to correct the financial errors that have been recently identified. Not to provide the needed funds will do serious damage to our schools. The situation will get worse, not better. There are those who believe that defeating one or more of these measures will somehow punish involved individuals or groups. It will not. Again, it will only make the financial situation worse. I'm confident that our town meeting, an intelligent group that truly cares about Chelmsford, will do the right thing. Let's resolve the financial issues and let those of us on the school committee make sure that we do not find ourselves in a similar position in the future. And I would just add, this action cannot be done quickly. It would be nice. A number of people in town are frustrated because we don't move quickly. Some of the processes, grievances, legal issues, and so forth, don't lend themselves to quick action. So bear with us. We'll get there. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Pat Magnell, Precinct 8. A few minutes ago, another town meeting rep went to write an amendment to this article. I'd like to know what has become of that amendment.
I'll refer that to town council.
The intent of that amendment was to change the funding source from free cash to the circuit breaker. And I explained to the person who was going to make that amendment that I did not think that the circuit breaker was an available funding source for appropriation at town meeting. So my understanding is that town meeting representative decided not to pursue the amendment.
In that case, from a legal point of view, how would you suggest that an amendment be crafted so that the town meeting can try to give some direction so that that can be the source of money to solve the problem?
Well, as the town manager indicated, the reason why this is, even if it were circuit breaker money, the reason this is before town meeting is there needs to be an authorization to pay a bill of a prior fiscal year. So town meeting could vote to authorize the school department to pay the bill of a prior fiscal year out of available funds, funds available to the school department.
Okay, thank you for the information, but to me this is an illustration of how I feel like we're going around and around and around in circles. I thought that one of the whole premises of having the meeting scheduled for tonight was that we would have a report, we would have an explanation so that we would not be flying blind when we made a vote. But that is not the case. And I just think it's irresponsible in the interests of the people of the town to vote a way to spend their money when we still don't have all the answers. People want answers, I want answers, and I intend to vote no.
Susan Graves, Precinct 9. I don't feel like I'm flying, I forget the phrase, flying by the seat of my pants. I feel like we have an unpaid bill and we need to pay it. Simple, we need to pay our bill and then we can deal with the issue behind it.
I'm sorry, I was too busy talking. Maria Carafellis, Precinct 2. My understanding is the reason why we're here tonight is to pay these bills because services have been rendered and we have our civic obligation to pay these bills. I'm going to vote yes, and I want to move the question.
There is no other hold on, we are going to have an amendment. So once the amendment is ready, we'll have to address that.
Hey Kathy, how are you? Thanks for all your help. So glad you're on the
funds from free cash to
I hope
pay
you are
these
too.
special education bills.
I don't know if I've ever heard that. I thought it would go faster.
This is Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia. I think the amendment we're going to hear is to change the wording of the article from appropriating funds from free cash to pay these special education bills to authorizing the cash to pay these bills. And that subtle change in wording allows flexibility in how they are paid. What you might have picked up on is there is a kind of a revolving fund that the school department has at its discretion to pay monies for just these kinds of unexpected expenses. What is causing the complication here is that these bills were incurred in the last fiscal year, and so literally the school department couldn't pay them if it wanted to because it needs town meeting authorization to pay these bills in this fiscal year, though they were incurred last. It's a problem that has permeated the school department's budget for fiscal 2015, causing all kinds of complications, and not only here, but in terms of the underestimation of how much money will be required in the school department budget. The audit that took place earlier this year of the school department budget uncovered that approximately $500,000 had been overspent. However, the fiscal year is far from over, and the anticipation is that by the end of the fiscal year, which is next June 30th, that number will continue to grow. That is, the unfunded expenditures to
Okay, well,
the order of $1 million.
I will read the amendment, all right? The motion is, I move to amend the main motion, this is Article 1, Motion 1, by substituting the following. I move to authorize the town to pay the unpaid bills of the Crest Collaborative and the Merrimack Special Education Collaborative from funds available to the school committee. And that's submitted by Karen Blount. I don't know if it's typed up yet. Not yet. But now would be a time for the proponent to explain her motion, if she wishes to do so.
The explanation is very simple. The school has the funds in order to do something unexpected. Unpaid bills are unexpected. Of course, we never want this to happen again. Of course, this has to be paid. We can't let down the special education department. I wouldn't think of that. But to pull the funds from the appropriate places, start trying to figure out how to balance budgets instead of just going to the free cash pot. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the proponent? There being no questions, now would be the time for discussion.
Mike Rigney, 3 Sunset, 19 Billrica Road. While I do endorse the idea that we need to live within our budget, I would oppose this amendment. We put a plan together with the consultant, with the auditor, with the finance committee, with the board of selectmen. The plan relies on keeping $500,000 as a reserve, and that it includes the expected $215,000 or so that we expect to receive in school choice. It's certainly allowable for town meeting to ask us to change the funding source here from free cash to the circuit breaker, but our intent then would be to offer an amendment at the fall town meeting to basically balance out, so that instead of spending the 165 out of circuit breaker, then we intend to spend 62,806.59, which would still leave us with the $500,000 cushion. Thank you.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. I do have a question on the use of the circuit breaker. As I understand it, the $102,000 is for 1 month's worth of services, which was not necessarily forecast originally or exceeded the original forecast. So with it being the start of the school year, essentially, and us having several more months of this school year left, could it be expected that the $500,000 would actually be needed to spend within this fiscal budget for special education requirements?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, based on the information that we have available to us, all the identified special ed services through the remainder of the school year have been encumbered and are known, and we have that 20,000 cushion, as was mentioned by the consultant earlier. We do not anticipate at this point in time. However, as history has shown us, you can have issues that arise during the school year, so that's why we're seeking the $500,000 cushion. So the bottom line is, the answer is at this point, we don't know of any known draw on that cushion at this point in time.
Thank you.
Nick DeSilvio, Precinct 5. I just wanted to add to the two previous speakers that one of the unknown areas in the school budget is special education. So it just takes 1 or 2 students that have special needs to move into our school district, and we have to accommodate those needs. It's not a decision that we have, it's not something that we say yes or no. By law, we have to accommodate those needs. So if there are individuals, and in some cases, could be in excess of $100,000. So the $500,000 buffer that the consultant has suggested to us to carry is extremely important. It's something that we feel very, very comfortable with, but it's a small amount compared to what we've had in the past. In the past, that buffer has been as much as $1 million. So we need to protect ourselves. Otherwise, come April, if in November, December timeframe, we have a few children that move in, we have to accommodate those children. We are going to come, if we consume that $500,000, we could potentially have an issue. So we spend it now or we spend it later, but we need that protection. So I'm not in favor of this amendment.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Peggy Dunn from Precinct 1. I have a question. Are we in the question period of the amendment? Are we in the discussion period of the amendment? And can we move the question?
Well, we are not in the question period because nobody had any questions and everyone started getting up for discussion. Now, it's been our practice to allow people to ask questions during discussion. There are people who are waiting behind you. But if you move but since you asked a question, I don't think you can move the question now.
But I'm just asking, when these people speak, can I move the question?
You can always move the question as long as you don't make a question or a comment before you move the question.
Thank you.
I just have a Claire Janot, Precinct 7. I have a clarifying question. So the $500,000 reserve is all circuit breaker funds or partly the current year expected school choice funds, or what is it?
There is a $500,000 circuit breaker fund, and in addition, the school committee has $215,000 that will be coming in school choice monies
For fiscal 15.
Fiscal 15.
But so the 500,000 is balance in last year's circuit breaker money, and the 2.3 is coming in for this year's reimbursement? There's $2.3 million shown as expected FY15, and if I understand correctly, that's all but 20,000 encumbered for known costs in the current year.
Yes.
And then there's 500,000 listed as circuit breaker. Is that reimbursement from last year that wasn't needed?
Yes, what had happened was is we had a fourth quarter distribution in 14 of circuit breaker monies. And
It didn't get applied to
it
special ed
didn't get applied to special
expenses.
ed. We don't know why, but
Okay.
that makes it available, yes.
So the statute allows it to be used within the coming year. So my question is, although I understand the trend in special ed expenses generally would make a gambler say it's likely we might have that, is the expectation that it would be 500,000 from the coming year's reimbursement that would be left on the table at the end of the year then if we didn't need this reserve? Because it's more restrictive than if you
Right.
were to, not wipe out school choice maybe.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Evelyn Thorne, Precinct 5. I'd like to add to one of my former colleagues' comments on special education. It was referred to at that time that it might be out-of-district placements or students coming into our district that we didn't expect. But one of the things that we've also noticed is that our current students, as the year progresses, may have certain issues or additional needs that would fall within that budget. So we're not just looking at the possibility or the probability and trying to bet in the odds in favor of having more money that we're going to get students in. We're dealing also with the current students that we have. So there's a lot more to special education other than just out-of-district placements. The other piece is that the school committee will be having more information at their meetings relative to special education, and we certainly hope that we will see town meeting reps in the audience in order for them to expand the knowledge that they have in that particular area so that we can have a better understanding of where all of that money goes, because it's a considerable amount of money that the town spends on special education for our students. Thank you.
Frances McDougall, Precinct 1.
I'm listening.
I would like to move the question on the amendment, please.
We have a motion to move the question, the amendment on the question. We have, I don't know if we can get that on the screen. Oh, we're going to get it on the screen. So a vote in favor means that we are dispensing with any further discussion or debate, and then the next vote would be whether you approve the amendment or not. So as soon as you see the screen, you can now vote. Yes. It was flashed before you. There was a motion. Right now, what's before you is a motion to move the question, the amendment, actually. Yeah, the amendment was on the screen. It's no. If you look at the second paragraph, it says, which now I can't even read. But it basically said that it was requiring that the authorization be from available school funds. And that's how this would be funded. Can you put it back on the screen and we'll... It's over there. Right. Okay. So the motion... The motion failed, so we will continue with debate.
No, the motion was to move
Yes, the motion to move the question failed, which means now we continue with debate on the amendment.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. If we vote for the amendment today, and for some reason we run out of the $500,000 of the circuit breaker, can we vote to provide funding in April and not have a major crisis?
You never know.
And what would that major crisis be?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, a request can be brought forth at the spring annual town meeting for supplemental appropriations of the school department budget or any department of the town. The difficulty that you have is that when you're operating the budget, these costs, as was noted earlier, are going to be incurred and services are going to be met because in many cases they have to be met, in all cases they have to be met by law. So the difficulty in terms of operating a department, whether it's a school department or any department of the town, they can't assume that a town meeting appropriation is going to be met in April if it's brought forth. So in essence, what would happen is if these costs are incurred and those costs get chewed up, the school administration is going to have to operate their budget as though there were no appropriation. And therefore, it may have an impact on the services that they deliver, and they may have to hold off on purchases or other aspects of their service because one can't assume that an appropriation is going to be met at a subsequent town meeting.
Thank you.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. I know I've had a lot of anger from people I've talked to about the school committee's budget. When I've been on a board of trustees for a condo, every month we got a budget that said, this is the year-to-date expenses, this is what we have remaining, and you could go through it. People I've talked to said they need to be kept on a short leash. So I'm asking, I understand what you just said, Paul, but if they have X amount in the special ed and we're getting to January and they're seeing that the year-to-date they should be at 53% and they're at 65%, there's time to call a special town meeting to transfer money into their funds. We don't have to wait till April or till May to do it. Good management is you track your budget on a monthly basis, follow the trends, and see if you have an issue. Everybody says keep them on a short leash because that's how we got into this problem now already. So I'm asking, would that work if they saw in January they were running out on the special ed because they've had more people move into town or whatever? Is that an option for us to look at?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, that would be an option. Another option would be going to the Finance Committee and requesting a reserve fund transfer in lieu of a special town meeting. So those are the two options that they would have in order to get additional money prior to the April special annual town meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. Mr. Moderator, through you to the town manager. Paul, just to further clarification on a clarifying question from a few speakers ago, you stated that there was a fourth quarter distribution of
circuit
breaker funds, thank you, that was not, for some, you said for some unexplained reason, was not appropriated to special ed. Is that correct?
No. What happened was the fourth quarter distribution of circuit breaker monies arrived in early July. We do not have the answer to this date and don't understand why those funds were not utilized to make payment of the fiscal year 14 bills, because it certainly would have reduced that deficit significantly. And again, I think it just speaks to the overall disarray that was found there. But had that occurred, it would have been an issue. But since that didn't occur, that money then carries forward because it's not tied to a fiscal year. It's a revenue fund from the state, and therefore that is available, and that's what's being proposed.
Okay, so basically, is it correct that there are that these circuit breaker funds that are available, if they had been accounted for properly, would have been used to pay this bill, and we wouldn't be having this discussion?
That's correct. We wouldn't be having these discussions of unpaid bills. We would still be having discussions later on how much funds the school department needs to finish the
No, I understand that, but I'm talking about just the issue at hand. Thank you.
Yes.
Carol Kelly Selesky, Precinct 5. I think we all understand that the special ed funds are very fluid. Every year, when there is an overage, they come to town meeting to ask for support. If this were a normal year, if this weren't such an emotional situation, I think that town meeting under normal circumstances would pass this particular article, because that's what we do. We have free cash, we pay our bills. I think it would be best to separate the two, to go forward, get this bill paid, and then we can have a discussion about what went wrong. Thank you.
Laura Merrill, District 2. I would like to urge people to vote for this amendment. As the town manager just said, that we should have used circuit breaker money for these funds, and so I think we should use those. There was not free cash. Later on this evening, there's going to be another article coming up saying that we should spend more free cash, yet I know, according to the report in my hand, that we still have a $559,000 OPEB deficit that we were promised in April that would be resolved by the fall meeting. And now, when I read the report, there's a promise that there's future money coming of $610K. So that's where it'll be covered. I heard that there's been a plan to track our expenses better, but there's been no mention of controlling our costs any better. I think that if we vote this article in, we can use this money for circuit breaker funds or whatever other available funds. We'll have better answers available for the audit in the April meeting, and if we need to appropriate more money at that time from the free cash, then we'll have the information to make intelligent decisions. The whole argument of spend it now or spend it later, I think we should spend the money that's in this fund now and worry about what's coming on in the April meeting. I'd like to see when the FY16 budget is put together, if we need any more money for the school at that time. I'd like to see it all at that time. Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. Also chairman of the board at the Professional Center for Handicapped Children in Andover. I have a handicapped son, as many of you have heard over time. He was in the school department for many years as a special ed taker, if you will. He cost a lot of money. We didn't have the programs here to take care of my son in Chelmsford. He had to actually drive to Lexington to one of the collaboratives that you're trying to decide whether or not to pay the bill on here, something similar to that. As chairman of the board at the handicap school up in Andover, I can tell you that our bills are typically not surprises. And every single child in one of our programs is handicapped. We're on the receiving side. We get tuition. We get money from the federal government. We get money from the State Department of Public Health, and we get insurance money, very similar to what the special ed department in our town does. What the amendment here is trying to do is tell the school committee, dip into funds that you have available in your operating budget today and use that $140,000 in your funds. If you vote no on that, the next vote is to take money out of the town's free cash. What that is money that we gave too much money, and it would either go back to the taxpayers who gave too much money, or maybe it will go towards our pension fund for our employees in town that we don't have enough money saved up for. But the point is that isn't really what we should be concerned about. We should be concerned about not paying almost $1 million that was incurred last year, not 141,000, $1 million, 840 some odd thousand, almost $1 million. What we should do is wait. Go ahead and vote on this. It's 140,000. It's simple. But what we should do is wait and see which bills were not paid and why. If they're all special ed bills, I'd be real surprised if $1 million worth of expenses came as a surprise at the end of the year. I think it's a little disingenuous to say $140,000 was the last month of the year and it was a surprise. That isn't the point. 800 and some odd thousand dollars didn't get paid, and we don't know why, and we don't know what bills they are. And I can tell you, if they were all special ed bills, I'm going to be furious. They should not have been held aside, and they should not be invisible to the different accounting departments and people that we have. And if somebody held them aside, they should be held to account. But the town meeting right now doesn't know that. So I'm going to vote no on this amendment. I'm going to vote yes on taking $140,000 some odd dollars out of free cash, and then I'm going to wait and see what the department comes back and tells us about each one of those bills. And we should all ask for an accounting of what those bills are and when they came in. And then we're going to follow the emails back to see if somebody authorized those bills to be held back and wait until next year money comes in. That's what town meeting ought to do. Thank you.
For the amendment, of course, it's just that this was a bill that already pre-existed. If it wasn't overlooked, it would have come out of the appropriate funds from the school. I'm just asking for people to start understanding budgets and start balancing the budgets and taking the money from where it is. I understand what it's like to create budgets and the school committee working with a lot of people to create a new budget now. However, this was something that you already owed. This is something that you just need to pay from that fund. To be afraid of what's going to happen and cry wolf for later on, we have a lot of different money that is already put aside on free cash, and it will be there and it will stay there. And if it has to be appropriated back over to special ed, then we can do that. But right now, we owe this money. We need to pay this money, but this money came out specifically for special ed, and that's where it has to be paid from. Thank you.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8 again. From what the town council said earlier, the town meeting cannot instruct the school committee on where to pay this money from. The school committee's budget is at their discretion. And as I understand this amendment, and I wish council to correct me if I'm wrong, but we are authorizing the school committee to pay these bills, and then we're not telling them where to take it from. So they can take it from anywhere within their budget, or they could approach the finance committee and ask to use discretionary funds if they so desired, based on this amendment, whereas the original bill instructs to take it straight from free cash and we know where it's coming from. Is that correct?
Yes, essentially that's correct.
Then I would really encourage everyone to vote no on this amendment, because we have absolutely no control where the money comes from if we vote for this amendment.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7. I wanted to ask everybody, I understand the emotional side of this, but I wanted to ask everybody to consider defeating this amendment. Circuit breaker funds have a special, unique attachment to them in the statute that specifically allows the school committee to retain the funds for 1 year. And that was put into the statute because of the volatility of special ed costs and how they can come up and be unexpected, and a school committee budget might be tight enough that there's no place for them to go. Personally speaking, as a school business manager in another district, I would say that wherever it's possible to retain up to that 1 year, it's prudent financial planning. When you think about a $50 million school budget and $500,000 in reserves, as a percentage of that budget, it's nowhere near what we retain for the town to have flexibility. So if you separate the emotions, I think that this is a wise move to have 1/4 of the circuit breaker available. Speaking as a town meeting member, I don't want to be called back here in January because somebody says I've got a problem with my budget. I want this town to manage their budget, both the town and the school side, so that we maybe move to a place where we're back to where we used to be years ago. I like the good old days when the spring was the money and the fall was something else. And people really living with their budgets will live with the plan that comes up in the spring. So I would encourage the defeat of this article. Motion to amend.
Mr. Moderator, seeing no one behind me or anywhere near me, I would like to move the question.
Okay. We will not vote on the motion to move. We'll just vote on the amendment. All right? So when the screen comes up, a yes vote is to authorize the school committee to pay from their available funds this obligation. A no vote will then revert us back to the original article, which is to have the funds come out of free cash. And you can vote now.
I think it's a lot more one-sided than I expected. I expected this to be a fairly close vote, that the town meeting reps were going to send a message to the school committee, but it's being soundly defeated. So this will revert to the original article wording, which would appropriate money from free cash to pay these special ed monies. Let me remind you that this is just the first of 4 articles on the special town meeting warrant, and then we have the carried forward articles from the fall annual town meeting, about a half dozen of those.
The amendment is defeated, 46 in favor of the amendment, 101 opposed with no abstentions. So now we go to the original warrant article, in which the town is asking this town meeting to authorize the payment of these bills from free cash. A yes would be to authorize that disbursement. A no would be to vote not to authorize the disbursement.
So again, the point is that these bills need to be paid, have not been paid, and there's some urgency in doing that. There are a handful of town meeting reps, and you can see them there indicated in red, who think that the bills should not be paid. I'm not sure what the logic is in not paying the bills. Also note that there are 146 out of 162 town meeting reps here present tonight.
The article passes 131 in favor, 13 opposed, 2 abstain. We'll now move on to motion 2 of Article 1.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The second motion under this article is to seek a transfer from free cash to pay bills incurred by the school department for the prior fiscal year, in which at the time these services were incurred, there was a sufficient appropriation to make the payment of these bills. And so in essence, there were POs set aside for this, but the bills were not paid. So again, the guidance from council under this article is that this is a majority vote, because at the time there was a sufficient appropriation and a purchase order. You can see the dates of services, but these bills were not paid.
Now is an opportunity for question and answer.
Maria Carafellis, Precinct 2. Paul, can you, I'm sorry, moderator through you to the speaker. Can someone answer to me who Joe Warren and Sons is for almost $8,000?
Cafeterias? They perform for work in the cafeteria.
Okay,
So again, these are other services. Then these are non-special educational collaborative services that were provided, and Joe Warren and Sons did work in the cafeteria.
Okay, and that's a month's worth of bills, or just
Yes.
one invoice,
Yes.
correct? Thank you.
Hank Cool, Precinct 4. I have a general question for all the school money. If we appropriate, which we should, all the money for the schools, will there be any further cuts this year at the school department?
It's my understanding from the discussions that we had that the amounts that are being requested under this article and that the article to adjust the budget for fiscal 14 would allow the school department to complete the current fiscal year without any further reduction in services. And again, there'd be that cushion of the $500,000 in circuit breaker money and the $215 in school choice monies to address unforeseen issues that would arise. So the short answer to your question is no, we don't foresee any additional cuts.
All right, great. And I urge everybody to vote for it. But second question, when we do appropriate the money for the school, will that affect the municipal budgets?
No,
Not at all.
the funding from this is coming from free cash. It is not coming from other departmental budgets.
Okay, I heard rumblings it could down the road affect.
And in fact, you'll see at the next article in the annual, we're actually seeking some supplemental appropriations for some of the town budgets that need to be addressed at this time.
All right, thank you.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. Paul, how much money did the school department return at the end of the last fiscal year to the town as being
Zero.
unspent?
They didn't return any funding to the
Okay.
town.
So I guess then because you said that this money has, that the wording you used was that these funds had been appropriated, but it sounds like the school department spent their entire appropriation for last year.
Yes, they did.
Okay. So this is above them, so they did not give back any money at the end of the year of unspent. So I guess, so how do you explain where you say this was already, had been appropriated?
No, what I said, Mr. Moderator, to the speaker, what I said is at the time that these services were ordered, you can see they were ordered in May, December, October, June, and so forth, April. At the time these services were ordered, there were POs put in, and there was an available appropriation at the time the POs were entered in and the services were ordered. What I don't have the answer to your question is why weren't the bills paid? We don't know the answer to that. But the bottom line is when they were ordered, there was sufficient appropriation as entered in the PO system.
Sufficient appropriation at
Right.
the time that they were ordered, but not
Exactly.
necessarily, but it still means that the school department went over their budget and didn't return any funds at the end
Exactly.
of the year.
And then the
thank you.
final motion will be them, which there wasn't an appropriation, and they still ordered the services.
Chris Bowman, Precinct 4. I'd like to tag on to the previous speaker's question. I understand that this Part 2 for Article 1 says that the appropriate monies were available to the school committee for these particular services. What I don't understand is where this 15,000 plus monies went. So these were services that were ordered on the PO, so they should have come out of the budget and not used for other things. And so the 15,000 should be floating around someplace, or was the $15,000 used for something else? And if it was used for something else,
Okay.
do we know what that is?
With all due respect, ask one question at a time,
Okay.
and then you'll get an answer to that question, and then you can ask another question if you so choose.
Okay, so the appropriate monies were available to the school for these monies, and they had the appropriate purchase orders for that, but it appears, for whatever reason, the purchase order invoices were not paid. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do we know what happened to that $15,000+?
What we do know is that at the end of the fiscal year,
Okay.
all of the school appropriation was expended. What we do know is that there were bills paid in the subsequent fiscal year, the current fiscal year in July, of $780,000 that were not paid last year. And again, these bills did not surface until several weeks later and were not paid. So
Okay.
the bottom line is we don't know why this happened at this point in time.
Okay, so
What
it's
we do
not-
know is that there were POs, but they were never paid.
Right, so it's not a matter of this $15,000 floating around someplace.
Right.
It's just gone.
It's been expended on something else,
Okay,
obviously.
thank you very much.
Anyone else have any questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Finance Committee unanimously approves this? Recommends this, I'm sorry.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Does the School Committee have a recommendation?
Once again, we did not vote on this. I am being told by my fellow members that they all individually approve this, and so do I.
Okay. So now's the time for discussion. Is there any discussion on this issue? There appears to be none. There appears to be some.
Sorry. Excuse me?
Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. I really would appreciate if people at certain tables would keep their comments to themselves when I stand up here.
I couldn't hear anything. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So, my question is, I understand, my statement is I understand money's gone. Okay, great. My question is, are we, other than the audit, are we going to be able to track down where the dollars went? Because you can't just say, oh, well, it's just not here anymore.
Why don't we have that question answered, and then maybe
Okay.
we can go from there.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, as I stated earlier, money is fungible. What we know at this point is the school department expended its entire town meeting appropriation for the fiscal 14 budget, and they expended an additional $780,000 beyond that, and they've expended $141,000 in unpaid bills. I can't go back and match up, 15 here, 140,000. All we can look at is in the aggregate of what the result was. And as we stated earlier, practices will be instituted to prevent this from reoccurring, but we cannot recreate as to why certain POs were paid and others weren't. We just don't have the knowledge, nor do I anticipate we'll ever get that question clearly.
I guess, Mr. Moderator, I guess the question is...
Manager, I'm the manager, you're moderator.
Thank you for reminding me that. Sometimes I think I'd rather be the town manager. Mr. Manager, I guess the question is, when the final forensic audit is done, will there be some way to track where the money did go? I guess that's the question you're asking.
A full accounting, exactly.
No, I don't see how that's going to happen. What we know is the total amount that was expended and what was expended in July, and then what's being approved to be expended this evening. We'll never be able to go back and say, well, why did this appear on the list, but yet another PO not appear on the list? We just won't have the ability to answer those questions, because it wasn't like these bills, to our knowledge, were deliberately chosen as, oh, we're not going to pay the mock trial bill, we're not going to pay Garelic Farms. What we know is, when we got to the end of the school year, the school department and the school administration believed that the budget was tight, and they worked with the town accountant in an effort to move funds from revolving funds and other expenditures. They were able to do what was allowed within the legal limits of the law, and obviously what happened here is they were over. But we have no way of knowing, even to date, and even with the assistance of a forensic accountant, as to why certain bills didn't surface until later and why certain bills were paid late.
I'm not
We
sure
just
that's
don't
the
know.
question, though.
You're asking where's the $15,000 go?
No.
idea.
I think that the question that the questioner is asking is, the school committee or the school department overpaid their budget. I think the question is, did they overpay special ed $100,000? Did they overpay?
Yes, that detail is available. We have.
I think that's the question.
Yes, we have an accounting of fiscal year 14, but it can't go in and explain, well, why are these 15 bills?
I don't think that was the question.
Yeah.
I think the question is, we know they spent their whole budget. Do we know where they spent it?
Yes.
Okay, also to get a little bit more detail, because that is correct, sir, and I appreciate that. I'm not asking what happened. What I'm asking, and you should know by date of purchase order, by checks, exactly where the dollars were spent, who they were given to.
I think that the town manager has answered that they know where it was.
He's saying, to my understanding, he's saying that certain departments had this much money, certain departments had that much money, but each department, everybody is spending the money in paying somebody, and so in any forensic accounting, you do find out specifically where the dollars
I think
right?
I think that what the town manager is saying is they know where the school committee budget went over what they anticipated to be, and that they know that there was money spent above what was the original budget amount. And what they're saying is that there are a bunch of bills that have not been paid.
Right.
Some were special ed, which we just dealt with. These are non-special ed bills in which, at the time that they were incurred, there was money in the account, or at least in the budget, to pay them. That's, and what the town manager is saying, not the moderator, the town manager is saying, is that he doesn't know why these bills were not paid.
no,
These specific bills were not
Sure,
paid.
Sure, I understand that.
Okay.
So my last question is, are we going to get, as town reps, I know that there's going to be some information, but are we going to get full disclosure on how the dollars were spent? Since such a problem was created, we would like to take a good look at what's going on. Thank you.
Sure.
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I don't know what full disclosure means. What we can report is what lines, what vendors were paid. But, I mean, we're spending $50 million plus other monies. I mean, we're not going to give a list of $50 million of appropriations to show what each individual bill was paid. You know, that would be a list that goes the length of this room. But the bottom line is,
No, it isn't.
we will give as much information we can as to what was paid in terms of accounts. So what was paid in utilities, what was paid in special ed, what was paid under the lunch program, what was paid under textbooks. That's the detail. We're not going to be able to give you in terms of detail.
I think that satisfies the question. I think that what the concern was, if you budgeted $100,000 for electric and you spent 120, we know that you overspent the budget by 20,000. Yes.
Mr. Moderator, Bilber from Precinct 9. That is not the moderator you're looking for, right? Little mind games there, but...
Thank you for reminding me of my shortcomings. Go ahead.
No, it was meant to lighten the mood. I'm a little bit confused here this evening. Typically, when we're addressing school budget items, we have the committee up front, and the committee is speaking to it. I'm not trying to make ill of the process. I'm just trying to understand. Paul, is there a reason why you're speaking to it as opposed to the Dr. Tiano or the chairman of the board?
The article was submitted by the town manager. As noted earlier, the school committee hasn't taken an official position on these articles. I have worked with school officials, finance, board of selectmen, other officials, in a comprehensive manner to identify the issues at hand, get the auditor on board, address the issues, and so forth. In the essence of efficiency, I'm trying to move this along. They're free to come up to the microphone at any time, any members of the school committee, selectmen, finance committee, and so forth. I think we've answered the questions thoroughly, and I think we'll continue to do that. So there was no orchestration. We're basically saying, hey, Paul, you're answering these questions on the school committee. In essence, the article was submitted by me as town manager, and I'm seeking to the best of my knowledge to answer the questions to the best of my ability. And again, if you've seen earlier tonight's discussion, members of the school committee, the superintendent, and others have come in and added in, and they're welcome to continue to do that.
So, Mr. Moderator, a follow-up question. When we get past this point here and we go to pursue the additional articles, will the school committee be speaking for themselves at that point?
Well, I certainly can't answer that question.
Yeah,
no.
I think you'll see myself and school officials addressing the supplemental budget request, yes.
Okay, thank you for the information.
Very good. Is there any further discussion? There being none, a yes vote means that you're approving the appropriation from free cash of $15,412.64 to pay these bills. And you can vote now. The article passes. Affirmative votes were 136. The no votes were 6 with 2 abstentions. Now we will proceed to motion 3 of Article 1.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is the final motion being requested under this article. This is to transfer from free cash a sum of $23,743.90 to make payment of school department fiscal year 2014 bills, in which at time that the bills, there was an insufficient appropriation at the time the bills were submitted, and that list is shown on the screen and in the handout this evening. As you can see, there were 6 bills of which there was insufficient appropriation, and therefore this requires a 9/10 vote for approval.
Does anyone have any questions regarding motion 3 of Article 1?
Dave McLaughlin, Precinct 6. This is a similar question to the one I asked earlier. I take it these are an amount of funds that were not budgeted in fiscal 2014, but were incurred?
Right. At the time that these bills were incurred, there was no sufficient funds in the budget to meet these obligations, yes.
And so the next question for the school committee or the administration is, why were the amounts spent if it wasn't budgeted?
Mr. Moderator?
Yes.
That's exactly what we're trying to figure out in terms of working with our forensic auditor and working with all the support that we have from outside folks looking at our district.
Very good.
Dennis Sheehan, Precinct 4. If town meeting rejects this article, what happens then? These people don't get paid?
That is correct. These people would not be paid.
So that no one can pay it unless town meeting approves?
That's correct. No one can pay. You need a 9/10 vote to authorize the payment of these bills.
Thank you.
And in this case, appropriate too.
Any further discussion?
Carl Styling, Precinct 4. The question I have is relative to the POs. It says that there were no POs for these. How can the services be incurred without POs?
I don't believe that's what it said, but I'll defer to town manager.
No, that is correct. There were no POs related to these purchases. I'll leave it to the school. I'll leave it to the school officials to answer how the services were incurred without a purchase order.
Right.
And I think you're going to hear the answer. They don't know, but they can answer the question for me.
In almost all cases, whenever you make a purchase, you should have a purchase order. That is really the basis of our budget. We have an appropriated budget, and we have to make sure that we have a purchase order. In some cases, as you see up here, there was no purchase order. We have been working to make sure that we have a purchase order in as many cases as we can. There are some cases when you can't have a purchase order, but in these cases, we certainly should have had a purchase order.
Any further discussion?
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. I notice a line item for Kelly Services. I know that is for substitute teachers. Is this the total amount for substitute teachers, or is this an excess amount from the original budgeted contract?
It's 1 month. It's 1 month of services.
1 month extra of services.
Oh, 1 month of services that wasn't paid. Right.
1 month, yeah, okay. What would the repercussions be if we did not pay Kelly Services for the 1 month? Anyone?
I'll leave that to.
Well, it's an unpaid bill. I'm not a lawyer. You have an attorney here, but I would say one of the options for this company, if they didn't get paid, was to seek legal counsel and to make sure that they did get paid for that. So you got to put yourself in the position of this company. They were requested to provide a service. They provided the service in good faith. They want to get paid for the services that they provided.
Well, Mr. Moderator, under the municipal finance laws, municipal officials are not allowed to incur a contractual obligation without an appropriation. And anyone who does business with the town is charged with the knowledge of whether or not, in fact, there's a sufficient appropriation to pay the bill. So the difference between motion number 2 and motion number 3 is motion number 2, as the town manager explained, there was a sufficient appropriation. So the town owes that money. There's no defense. In this instance, there is technically a defense, lack of appropriation. Will that prevent Kelly Services from suing the town? Only they could answer that question. But the reason why it's a 9/10 vote, it's such a high quantum of vote required, is because the way the statute is written, the town's not legally obligated to pay a bill if there was an insufficient appropriation at the time that the services were rendered. Do I recommend that you rely upon that and not pay this bill? No, I do not.
Just one follow-up. Do we know who authorized the service to be provided without a PO? To anyone who can answer?
With many of our vendors, we do have ongoing contracts. For example, Kelly Services, and you look at NRT, bus provides our transportation. At this time, I cannot tell you why these specific bills were authorized without a purchase order. Sorry.
Chris Bowman, Precinct 4. Looking at the table for this motion, it's apparent that Kelly Services sticks out because of its huge amount. What I would like to know is what are the current school department procedures in writing a PO, specifically whether or not there's a minimum value below which a PO is not required, and that anything above that minimum must specifically have a purchase order attached to it.
There is no minimum value. We would like to see purchase orders in practically all cases. In some cases, it's not practical to have a purchase order. If there is an emergency situation, supplies need to be ordered, etc., it's like making a purchase order after you've already ordered the services. So the procedures that we have in place now, I'd like you to know, is that the purchase orders are put in by, let's say, an administrator at the high school. I'll use that as an example. And then that purchase order would come into the business office. That high school principal would not be able to put the purchase order in if there was not sufficient funds in that account.
Okay, well, obviously there was a breakdown in the procedure. I understand that there are situations in which a purchase order may not be the best way to go, especially if there are materials that are needed that are on the very low end. I also understand the need for emergency purchase orders, so they should, I would recommend, an emergency purchase order procedure in order to tighten the gap. And because there are things...
Ms. Bowman?
Yep.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, why don't you ask the question?
Okay,
I think
I'm
the
getting
people will
there.
be able to answer it.
I'm getting there. Wouldn't it be prudent for the school department to institute a minimum purchase order limit, knowing, and apparently school department officials don't have any problem ordering services without a purchase order in order to close this gap that we appear to have?
That question has already been answered. they are getting purchase orders on everything going forward. There clearly was some sort of breakdown in process, and we don't have the answer to exactly who, what, when, or how, but that question has already been answered going forward.
Okay, so my follow-up question would be, were those procedures or were there additional training on purchase order procedures in the school department to call out the problem to ensure that it doesn't happen again going forward?
Again, it's been answered that all future acquisitions will be via a purchase order. The second forensic report, which will explain that, is not done yet.
Addressing that specifically. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. Mr. Moderator, I don't have a question, but I would just like to say a few things. There has been enough of information in press, newspapers, on the internet, everywhere, for we have most of this knowledge of what is going on here. And so we don't have to keep asking the same questions over and over again because we do know about it. There are some unknowns right now, but what I'm saying is that we have to pay these bills.
Okay, but it's not debate, it's question and answer, so do you have a question?
Well, okay, bye.
Okay, thank you.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. I do have a question. No purchase orders, get it. But all these companies, number one, they submitted invoices to us, yes? Because we're being billed, right? Okay, so on the invoices, usually with companies, especially of very large fee, there's a person who, their connection, their rep, whoever. Do they have that for Kelly Services so we know who they were interacting with? Because that would be the person responsible not doing the PO. It's not that hard to find out.
We have interactions with our representative from Kelly Services. Could be from my administrative assistant, could be a building principal, could be a secretary at one of the schools. We have many interactions. Again, at this time, I'm not sure who authorized this billing right here in terms of without a PO.
Okay, so my question is, on the invoice itself, there is no specific person or persons that that ordered these particular services. Forget the PO. I understand that's a procedure, okay. But when you call into a company and you need a temp or you need a sub, their invoicing not only assigns the person that is going to the location, but they also assign on the invoice who the person was who contracted that particular, not just the school. My question is, are those names on those invoices?
That I would have to check specifically for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Finance Committee unanimously recommends.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Sure. Does the School Committee have a recommendation? Thank you. Okay, so now is time for discussion.
Dave McLaughlin, Precinct 6. We've heard a lot of explanations tonight which have not been explanations at all, and we still don't understand a lot of the matters that have been going on. I've also heard a number of people say the town has incurred the costs and therefore we have to pay it. I don't believe that's the case. If someone has committed the town to spend money who has not been authorized to spend that money, we don't have the obligation to pay it. That's a problem between the person who didn't have the authority to spend the money and the organization that they work for. I think this motion, in part because it's $24,000. I think this motion should be defeated to send a strong message.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. I believe we should pay this, not because we want to. I resent it. I resent having to pay this money, but we really don't have an option of not paying it. We know pretty much what has taken place here, and I don't think that asking questions, we have a lot of information. We won't have the final information until the forensic audit is finished, and we've been told we won't have that probably until January. But I think for the financial statements for the town, plus we as a town, why make the children in the schools suffer for something they didn't have anything to do with? So we need to pay it. Thank you.
Maria Carafellis, Precinct 2. I'm in favor of this article. I too resent it because someone obligated the town that didn't have authorization to obligate. That being said, at this point, there are vendors that provided a service in good faith. So in good faith, we need to pay them. We'll correct the problems. We'll put the policies in place. No PO, no purchase order, no allotment, nothing unless you have a PO. I strongly urge you to vote yes.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. These bills have been incurred, and yes, I understand nobody likes to pay bills that we don't know who turned around and spent the money when they weren't authorized. But again, I submit, by following the invoices appropriately, you will find the names as to who spent the money. You will also find who their bosses are, who turned around and had them spend the money, and then action should be taken with those particular individuals. But at the same time, we can't have the kids turn around and suffer the consequences. We do need our sub-teachers. So that is what I submit, and thank you.
Thank you.
Andy Sillinge, Precinct 7. I have some similar ideas that, as I remember when I worked before retirement and needed contractors, I would get a budget, and I wouldn't spend it a whole month, but here's the project and it's this much. I would like saying, here's how much for this year we need special services. But a little bit like special education, you don't know who's going to get pregnant, who's going to get sick, how many substitutes we need that day. And yet the kids are there. So I could see that, well, I don't see how that can be solved exactly. You can do a purchase order at the end of the month, and that would take care of it, because that's sort of what it is. We don't have the exact amount when we start the month. So I said this because I'm in favor of just paying it now and working out some details later.
Thank you.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. Last comment, I understand now we are going to be ensuring that there are POs that are going out and you set up the program, but I also want to submit to have a understanding with the vendors themselves, not just our system, but with the vendors, that they must understand unless they get a PO from us, they do not provide services as well, and then they contact the appropriate person, especially if it's an emergency thing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so there being no further discussion, a vote yes is to pay this bill. It requires a 9/10 affirmative vote in order to pass.
Nine-tenths affirmative vote. That is a real supermajority. And what I find interesting about the discussion that you're hearing here is that people are understandably upset and seem to want to find who's culpable here. But that's really outside the boundary of these articles. We're just trying to get the articles paid. And I think that once we have the forensic audit in hand, oh dear, we're showing that
The article has failed.
That the article has failed.
We needed a 9/10 vote. I had previously announced that we required a 9/10 vote to pass this article. We have 120 in favor. We have 15 opposed. 129 in favor, 15 opposed, and 2 abstention. Where there were 15 opposed, we would have needed 151 in favor to get your 9/10 or something like that. Pretty close.
13 no's you need.
Well, I didn't do the math. I mean, the computer did the math, but it has failed.
The computer is correct.
What? 88%, so we did not reach the 9/10.
May I make a motion to reconsider this vote, please?
That's an appropriate motion. All in favor of the motion to reconsider, raise your... Okay, we shall now re-vote the matter. When he's ready for us, we will re-vote the matter.
Mr. Moderator,
Yes.
we're reconsidering. I'd like to speak on the reconsideration, please.
Sure.
I know everybody's frustrated. I'm frustrated too. But one thing that I think you should realize is if we vote this down, I believe what will happen is somebody's going to take us to court, which means there's a pretty good chance we're going to have to pay the bill anyway. Plus, we're also going to have legal fees incurred. I think the smartest thing to do is just say, vote the money and not have to get involved with the legal system at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is reconsideration.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, what I'm not sure about, if they turn around and redo it and they vote it down again, does that mean that the school committee couldn't pay this from their budget?
Yes, they could not pay it from their budget.
Okay, so therefore, then when the people want to come after, it would be
Right.
a problem.
All right. As soon as we're ready. Again, this requires a 9/10 vote.
So what we need is at least 2 of the people who voted no to now vote yes. Let's see if there are any changes of heart. I see an abstention where I don't think there was one before.
Oh, God. 129.
30 and 10 is...
I think it is.
9/10.
This is a pretty high bar to have to pass a 90% approval.
The article passes. 131 in favor, 10 opposed, 2 abstentions.
It's interesting to note the people who
Article 2.
continue to vote no. I'd love to interview them and find out why they did so. So that concludes Article 1 of the special town meeting warrant. We're now going to move on to the other articles. This is just in the special town meeting. We've yet to get to the regular town meeting articles that were postponed from earlier in October.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Hansen from the Board of Selectmen, here to present Article 2. This is the acquisition of 101 Mill Road. The reason we're here tonight, this opportunity became available rather quickly. As some of you may know, David Hedison of the Chelmsford Housing Authority was interested in purchasing this, a former Merrimack Education Center building, for an affordable housing project, but there were some hang-ups with some funding, and the project essentially no longer became available for him. It no longer became financially feasible. So the town saw this as a potential opportunity for the town. Paul, if you flip through a few slides, I'll explain briefly how large the parcel is and why we think this may be of interest to the town. The building on site was built in 1816. It was converted into office use. We have a nice overhead shot. It's a beautiful piece of property. You can see a corner of the pond on the lower right-hand corner there. The building itself houses 9 rooms, 2 full baths, 1 3/4 baths, and a half bath. The property is currently assessed by the town at $542,800, and the proposed purchase price that the town negotiated was $490,000. As you see, a few inside shots. Now the town does have a few different options. We didn't have time to come forward with a plan tonight to tell you exactly how we're going to use this building, but we essentially didn't want to let this opportunity slip by and potentially have an unfriendly 40B or some other type of development go in on this road when there may be some use to the town. We've heard a few different options. There's been residents who've come forward and said we could cut off a piece of the property in the back for additional recreation or parking, other options like that. The town has talked about amongst ourselves about the ability of trying to find other funds to do a housing project similar to what David Hedison was doing. We've been trying to brainstorm different ideas, but again, we haven't had enough time to come up with a final plan yet. But what we would like to do, if town meeting authorizes the purchase of this building, is to move forward and create a committee so that we can more fully explore all the options available. At the end of the day, the town, if we didn't need the building, there'd be an option to possibly separate that piece off and resell it, or if we can find a use for the building and find funds to renovate it, it could be a beautiful addition to the town. So we are proposing funding this project. It was on the first slide. $373,762 from overlay surplus and $116,238 from the sale of real estate funds. So again, we apologize for not having a plan in place for the property, but as you're aware, this property was being actively marketed. In speaking with the owners at the Merrimack Education Center and the realtor, there were other developers who were interested in the property, who were actively looking at the property, and thankfully we were able to, I believe I can say now, since the purchase price is out here, we were able to discuss in executive session the purchase of this, and we authorized the town manager to try and negotiate a price of $490,000, and he was able to sign a purchase and sale agreement contingent upon town meeting's vote this evening. Oh, I'm sorry, didn't sign the purchase and sale agreement. Let me step back. But an agreement for this price contingent upon town meeting vote. Is that correct, Paul? Okay, thank you. Thank you. So if you have any questions how we came here, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Okay, so now it's time for question and answer.
Mr. Moderator, Bill Griffin, Precinct 9, through you to Selectman Hanson. Question is, are you saying that one of the possible uses for this would be yet another 40B? There are already 2 assigned within that precinct. We just recently completed activity on one on Turnpike Road, where the number of vehicle trips would go up significantly. Are you stating that this is another possibility for a 40B in that locale within a mile?
Well, I think essentially the reason of pushing so hard to try and purchase this property is essentially to avoid a 40B, or essentially an unhappy 40B. There had been talks about the possibility of trying to do something similar to what David Hedison would have done, which would not be to demolish the building and put, a few hundred units there, but possibly just renovate the current existing building into something. Again, I mean, we don't have a plan on how we would fund that yet, but it was just one of the options we've been brainstorming. We didn't want you to come here tonight and said we had no potential ideas for the building. We do have some different ideas, but time is of the essence because we knew we had town meeting this evening. We had to make a vote very quickly within a week or two time period, and the property was being actively marketed, so we negotiated a price. It certainly wouldn't be I think the intent of Well, actually, once the town purchases it, it would be between, town meeting and the Board of Selectmen and others to decide what we would do with the property.
Mr. Moderator, I have one follow-up question then, and that would be this. Depending on how this vote turns out tonight, I'd like to ask, will you make every effort that representatives from Precinct 9 will be part of that committee, at least 2? Thank you.
That sounds reasonable. Thank you, Bill.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. I just want to make sure I understand that if we vote for this, that what role does town meeting then have in its future, especially if the purpose of the property involves expenses that come from the town?
Well, it would depend on those particular expenses. Depending on the particular account, if it was, CPC, you would need authorization from that. If it was from the general fund, you would need authorization for that. Any authorization that town meeting has to appropriate funds, if it was directed towards this property, that would still stand. This would just be an appropriation to purchase the property as is from the Education Collaborative.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. Mr. Moderator, I have a question for Matt over there. In this building, are we going to be keeping the historical status?
That's a good question. I don't have that answer off the top of my head. I don't know if anyone
Okay,
else
I have a
does.
second question then. Can we do an amendment tonight that that we pass this, but with it keeping a historical standing to it? I don't see why not, but I don't know.
What do you think, John?
This is not just a piece of property that, you're throwing around. This has a history to it, so we want to keep the historical standing to it, which would protect it.
I think town council is going to answer whether that's within the scope of the question.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Somebody.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, I think that legally you could make an amendment that require the acquisition of this property. I think you could authorize the acquisition of this property subject to the grant of a historic preservation restriction to a nonprofit. I don't think I would recommend that at this point because of the law of unintended consequences, because that would significantly restrict the ability of this committee to consider all of the different options for the property. So I think while it sounds simple enough, it could place some restrictions on this property that would inhibit the committee, the selectmen, and town meeting in the future from using the property for its whatever purpose you decide.
Will we have to put it as nonprofit? Because you added on to what I asked. I'm just asking
Well, what do you-
the
what-
historical status of the property, but then you added a nonprofit. I mean, why would it have to be nonprofit too? I understand how that would limit it a great deal, but historically it would limit it to a small degree, but certainly protect it from any.
Well, I'm trying to understand exactly what your intent is then, I guess. What is your intent?
To not destroy the land and overbuild the area and put another 40B there and do all things that it should be somewhat controlled. The mill there, right there, Russell Mill, is absolutely gorgeous. That property's right next to it. It's just beautiful. It's part of our town history, and I think we should be keeping it.
Well, Mr. Moderator, if I may, the problem is that you can't you can't place a restriction on land that you own. A restriction has to be held by a third party. So I'm.
Ergo, the nonprofit.
Well, a historic preservation restriction would typically be held by a nonprofit. I'm just not. I
So
guess.
we're not sure, right?
I'm sorry?
We're not really sure what we could do with that aspect.
What I'm trying to say is that if you place that kind of a condition on this vote, it could significantly limit the options that the town has to use this property in the future.
But it would be protecting the property, would it not?
Too much. The only way you could protect this property is to authorize the placement that a restriction be placed on the property.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm sorry. And if I could, to that point, I would ask that town meeting not try and place any restrictions on that yet. I think that's the type of thing that would come up from the study of this process. We're just getting into the very beginning. The whole point of purchasing this property is so the town could find a use for it, and so it wouldn't be essentially have something really bad happen to the area and the neighborhood like you're thinking. And I think the final outcome will come from the committee that's put in place that decides what would be best for the town's interest. The town is purchasing this for our interest. The town isn't developers, so I hope that really helps put you at ease a little bit.
And on that committee that is developed, other than Precinct 9, can we have Precinct 4 people there, please?
I hope we have people from all across the town, but
Okay,
maybe we can
thank you.
specify that, sure.
Jeff Apostolakis, Precinct 9. Mr. Moderator, to the presenter, just a very quick question. Are there funding available through the Community Preservation Trust Fund?
Selectman Joyce would like to talk about that.
Bob Joyce, Selectman. We spent a long time, the Preservation Commission spent a long time working on this, as far back as maybe March or even April. When I got on the Preservation Commission in April, we were talking about it as a possibility for preservation to purchase at least half of it, and then the Housing Authority to buy the other half of it. And unfortunately, that fell through because David Hedison couldn't find proper funding for it. So it was kind of lying on the table, and we picked it up in the fall pretty much. So one thing is for sure, if we don't buy it now, we'll never buy it again, because I think the owner has kind of had it with us. So, but it's a unique property, and it's a long-term strategic investment for the town. One of the things we did when we spoke to the owners was we told them we couldn't guarantee passage at town meeting, but certainly the 5 members of the board were in favor of it, and that we would do our best to get it purchased. And we made them Paul actually made a offer. So at one point we thought we might be able to buy it with stabilization money, but no, I'm sorry. The preservation money. At one point we thought we were going to buy it with preservation money, but the preservation money dwindled. And I think just recently we got some money, but certainly not enough to buy it. Let's see.
Bob, I'm going to interject just for a quick second, just to answer your question directly. Today we got an email from the town manager saying we got community preservation funds of $272,747.
Okay, thank you.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. Why is this property on the market? What was located in the building that is there? Anyone?
Well, Paul can probably describe better because he knows the history of it.
The Merrimack Education Center had its administrative offices in this site until basically a few months ago. It is now sitting vacant and has been marketed, as you said, for the last few months.
Did they just move to another location?
Yes, they've been in the process of reorganizing their activities, and they're now operating in another location on property that they own.
Right. I have 2 more questions. What shape? This is an 1816 building. What shape is it in? I live in one, so I know what they're about.
We've shown you some pictures earlier.
Yeah.
Gary Persichetti, the facilities director, and I toured the building about a month or so ago. It's in very good condition, because again, it was used as administrative office space. So we don't foresee there being any immediate maintenance issues with the building. We obviously would have carrying costs with the building.
Yeah. The thing is, we're talking like $500,000 for that. And I'm wondering, right now, what we just went through tonight and have more to go through, is this something we want to do? And since you don't have any plans for it, you don't know what you're going to do with it, are we buying a white elephant?
That's for town meeting to decide, essentially. I mean, that's not really a question that we can answer. It's the unknown.
Okay, Peggy, before you
Peggy.
ask your, can you, if you're going to please talk, can you please go out into the hallway? I'm getting signals from people that they can't hear the discussion, so please.
Oh,
and to
are you
finish my-
talking to me?
Not you.
Well, you said Peggy.
Not you, Peggy. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to people who are sitting at their tables.
Yeah, I
talking.
know. I've been having trouble hearing.
Peggy, to finish my answer, I wasn't quite done. If I could, Peggy, because I
Yes.
don't want you to think I didn't answer you.
Yes.
We hadn't had time to put a committee together to study this and to come up with a number of options to present at town meeting and ask for funding sources to do a specific thing. There was just absolutely no time to do this between the time when this came up to town meeting tonight. But we plan on starting that as soon as we get authorization to fund this tonight. So I apologize that we don't already have that answer.
Right, I understand that, but that's my problem, is that we don't know.
That's a good debate topic, I think.
Well, if you don't have a plan.
Okay, Peggy, now you're starting to be argumentative.
Okay.
No, I'm.
You want me to go to the back of the room?
No.
No, I'm asking, they have to convince me that we should buy this.
I understand, but it's question and answer. So instead
Okay,
of
my
arguing that you have a problem with the fact that they don't have...
My question is, what is their plan?
Well, they've already said to you they don't have
a
one.
plan. Okay, thank you.
Nancy Donahue, Precinct 9. I guess I hope it's not redundant, but if you have no plan for this, do you plan on knocking it down when someone said that and putting some other thing in place of that building?
I think, as the town manager just mentioned, the inside is in good condition. It was being used as administrative offices up until quite recently. We don't have the plan yet because we didn't have time, but like I said, if you do allow us to purchase this, we will put a committee together to study options, hopefully identify some funding sources depending on what the community identifies as a good use, and hopefully we can move forward over the
So
next year.
it could be demolished and something put in its place. That could be part of the new plan, yes or no?
I don't think we would, I doubt that would be the committee's recommendation to spend $500,000 on 1.7 acres in a big building to demolish the building. I can't imagine that would be a likely outcome.
That would be a concern of mine, that's why I asked.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Paul, Precinct 9. How's it currently zoned?
Residential.
Well, residential, I think it has a pre-existing educational component to it, but it's zoned residential.
So
If you'd like to put a school there,
it'd be for could it be used right now for residential use, I guess is what I was asking.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Chris Bowman, Precinct 4. If the town, for this hypothetical, if the town decides to buy this property and use it as administrative offices, will the building be historically preserved? Is that the intention?
I mean, if we weren't going to change the use, if we were going to find some administrative use for it, I don't think we would. I think we would make every effort to preserve its historical character.
Okay, thank you, I like that. And my second question is there a possibility that if this were used for town administrative offices, that the surrounding land itself could be designated a town park? Minus the parking lot, of course.
There is some potential for using, if we purchase this property, there may be pieces of it that we use for some type of recreational purposes that has been briefly discussed in the time that we've had.
Right. And for those who don't know, what is on one side is the Russell Pond historical structure. On the other side are soccer fields. Just behind the soccer fields is a state park. So this would be a great addition to that area in preserving.
Now you're arguing. So please, either ask a question or wait till debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Lane, Precinct 7. With the $272,000 figure that was given earlier, was that a state appropriation for matching funds, or was that the total balance?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, last Wednesday afternoon, following the recent approval of the state supplemental budget for closeout fiscal year 14 at the state level, these monies were included in that supplemental budget. Last Wednesday afternoon, the Massachusetts Department of Revenue certified the amount of distribution for the state match, and that's the 272. However, that money cannot be expended this evening because there's not been a vote or consideration by the Community Preservation Committee.
Understood. Any idea of what the balances are in CPC?
As of to date, the total fund balance in CPC is about $730,000 in total. I can't tell you the three buckets, but in the total fund balance, also that's for all of the funds.
And Mr. Moderator, one final question to one of the previous speakers. You had said you had explored CPC money to look at affordable housing and teaming up with David Hedison and such. Did you take a look at maybe some partial funding from CPC that would allow a restriction, a deed restriction for open space and for historical preservation, and not the historical, not the affordable housing component, but the other two that would qualify under CPC?
Well, I believe that would be an allowed use, but honestly, we hadn't had the opportunity to fully explore that yet. Again, we've had conversations about what potential uses might be and potential funding sources, but we haven't approached the CPC for any funding yet.
Yeah, thanks.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. This article specifically requests funding this acquisition from the overlay surplus and the sale of real estate. And it doesn't say anything at all about community preservation funds. And you've just said that the the 272 cannot be used for this acquisition at this time because it's not really allocated yet. So why was it brought up as into this conversation?
Was asked.
Sure.
How's it relevant, in other words?
Because originally, community preservation was interested in it back in April. And were it not for the fact that the Housing Authority decided they didn't have the funds available, nor would they have it in the foreseeable future, that they withdrew. And then, you know, we were just there, and then we wanted to look at it as a possible asset to the town outside of preservation. Preservation didn't have a lot of money back then either, but.
I guess I'm still confused. Does that mean that you're now looking at acquiring it through the overlay surplus and the sale of real estate fund, and then later on transferring it into housing based on these community preservation funds?
No, these two funds are available funds at this town meeting. That's why we're suggesting using these to fund the purchase of this. If there were any other types of activities that the CPC funds would be allowed to use above and beyond the purchase of the property for such a conservation restriction or something like that, then we might seek out other funds, such as the CPC funds. But these are the only funds that we're going to use to purchase the property.
Tom St. Germain, Precinct 7. As a person who has been in this house, I'd like to acquaint you folks of the historical nature of this property. It's an old house, period. The Met offices sliced and diced that property. There's telephone wires every which way. There's a sump pump in the cellar. The reason I know these facts is that I'm also a trustee of the Millstream foundation the adjacent property, and we looked at that house with the thought of preserving it, and we didn't know what to do with it. There's a couple of nice residential sections, but the rest of it is office petitions, wiring, and things that a former earlier speaker said is an old house and all the encumbrances that go with it. So don't buy this on the basis of it being something historical to be preserved.
Question. Mr. Moderator, Elaine McDonald, Precinct 1. I have several questions. One is there was a mention of carrying costs. Has MEC shared with y'all what the electricity and heating of it? Being in an old house, they tend to be not too well insulated, so you have to keep them pretty warm so your pipes don't burst.
We have that. No. At this time, we don't have that information.
Second of all, there was a mention that part of the reason why you wanted to purchase it is to avoid it becoming a 40B. Are there any 40Bs in Chelmsford or in adjacent towns that are put on such little piece of land? Because there's only one in a...
Yeah. Down here on Mill Road.
That's fine.
I believe so.
I'm sorry. Because without old houses, my question is about what it would cost to keep it going and not have it break while you figure out what you're going to do with it. Thank you.
Maria Carafelis, Precinct 2. I moved to this town in 1963, and one of the things that we used to do as kids is we used to go down to Mill Pond
Maria,
fishing.
it's-
Yes, I know that. Just a minute, please, sir.
No, you just ask a question,
All
and when
right.
you can argue during debate. That's the way
I'm not
the rules
arguing.
are.
I'm coming to a question.
Okay, then ask your question. Let's
If
not
you-
have a historical perspective here.
Excuse me?
Just ask your question,
I
Maria.
will. Is the mill house that has the wheel, that's considered historical, correct? The mill pond. Okay. The house is, when was the house built?
1816, is that right?
So would the house still be considered historical?
It's older than me. That's
Okay. If we purchase the house with the current funding, with an obligation to backfill with the community preservation funds, can we do that? To try and
I
make it?
defer to town council. I see him shaking his head. I don't believe that would be
I'm
allowed.
trying to figure a way in how to do this.
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, the community preservation law does not permit the use of CPA funds to supplant a prior appropriation. However, as Selectman Hanson indicated, there may be opportunities for CPA funds to do something above and beyond reimbursing the town for the purchase price through the acquisition of a restriction or something like that, or perhaps improvements to the property. But you couldn't use CPA funds to repay the accounts that this money is coming from.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thanks, Maria.
Ruth Monahan, Precinct 3. Mr. Moderator, to the speakers through you. Is this question really about to buy or not to buy?
That's the question.
Exactly. And as far as what to do with it, how to use it, is that something that would be brought up after some more exploration
Yes,
has been done, and town meeting at that time would have the opportunity, would it not, to vote on those suggestions of how it would be used?
I'm not sure the town meeting would vote on how the property would be used once it was acquired, and I think that the reason people are asking questions as to what the anticipated use is they don't want to buy a property that there is no use for, I would assume.
There would be, I think, some oversight to the process, though. If there was some specific funding that was requested, I mean, it would be need to be approved by the Board of Selectmen or town meeting. There would be approvals in place, and there will be a public input process and a committee process that's deciding on the use.
Thank you.
Beth Logan, Precinct 3. I'd like some clarification. Some of the questions have actually confused me. Could you please kind of outline on there the exact property we're talking about, and correct me that at the lower portion there, that is the Russell Mill parking lot and the soccer fields on the right, the portion of property we're talking about, and then what is to the left and right, I believe is private property. Could you please clarify?
I haven't looked at a plot plan.
This does have a pointer, right, John? Oops. All right. What we're talking about is the center parcel right here. What you see to the left, closest to me, is the mill stream. And there's the pond, as you can see, that goes into the historic mill stream, which is owned by a nonprofit trust and so forth. If you look to and again, it's 1.77 acres, which is the building in the front. You can see the parking area to the right of the structure, and then the land that goes to the back, and then it's a little wooded. To the very bottom there, what's open, is the parking lot to the Russell Mill Conservation Land. To the right is the Murphy soccer fields, and there's the entrance that goes in, the parking area from the Murphy, and then to the top right is a private residence.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify because somebody was talking about a state park, and I wanted to make sure we all understood.
Mr. Moderator, to you, to the speakers, Pat Magnell, Precinct 8. In the event that we don't vote to purchase this parcel, what reasonable expectations do we have that you think will occur to it in the near future? Do you have any insights you can give us?
I would hate to speculate on what will happen. All I can say is it is for sale to any willing and able buyer.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I can add to that on, I'm sorry, I'm right here. Last Monday, I called David Hedison, and he had told me that he has received numerous calls from developers, affordable housing developers, inquiring about this property.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, to the previous speakers, Elaine McDonald, Precinct 1. Does any of the property include the pond?
No.
So when Mr. Cohen was outlining, so the part that looks quasi-beach-like with the little sheds and that is not part of the property?
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Sue Danderaw, Precinct 9. Mr. Moderator, I think this is a question that I haven't heard a clear answer to. If a developer does come in, another party comes in and purchases the property, can they knock down that building? And I'd like someone from maybe the Historical Commission to answer that question.
I don't know if there's anybody from the Historic Commission in the room. What we do have in this community is a demolition delay bylaw. So if the property were acquired by a private party, they could file for a building demolition permit. However, the commission has a 1-year period where they can do demolition delay, where they can review the historic, attributes of the property, inventory them, and so forth. It's not a demolition prevention, it's a demolition delay, and obviously, ultimately at the end of the day, if they wait it out, the property could be raised. But there is a demolition delay bylaw in effect in this community, and so that's what would happen. So if the property were then sold, they could then file, and then basically it takes a 12-month period before the building could be raised.
So does anyone in the town, does any town official have the authority to stop the demolition of that building?
Ultimately, no. Ultimately, there can be nothing that would prevent the demolition of the structure. If they basically find that there's no feasible alternative, what can be done is, again, is a delay, but not prevention.
If they're going to add structures to that 1.7 acres, I assume they'll need possibly some variances to do so.
Well, it's a 1.77 acres, so it's a conforming lot. They would, again, if they're going to modify it because the structure is greater than 70 years old, they would have to go before the Historical Commission and get approval for the activity to preserve the historic nature of the site.
And one final question. I think I heard that the Chelmsford Housing Authority was in the discussions, does not have the funding today to purchase that property. But is it possible that if the town purchases that property, they may find ways to put affordable housing on that property?
Let me give you a little bit of the history on this thing, because I worked on this parcel basically going back to the late last spring. The original interest, as was mentioned earlier, was with the Housing Authority. And basically the notion at that time was to acquire the property, and the Housing Authority is going to move its administrative offices to this location. And those discussions went on for several weeks, a couple of months. And at that time, the town was going to contribute 50% of the acquisition price. Unfortunately, when the Housing Authority Director, David Hedison, then went in and brought in his architectural team, he basically felt it was not economically viable to do that move. And so we then went back to David shortly thereafter and said, on my initiative, and said, David, what about making this affordable housing, meaning community housing? We have a very successful project that just opened on Manahan Street for veterans, a group home, and so forth. David came back a few weeks later and said, no, the Housing Authority is not interested in pursuing an affordable or community housing project at that site. I then reached out to the Millstream owner, the trust that owns the parcel there adjacent to it, and said, do you have any proposed interest? And again, the town would be supportive of your acquisition of the property. And unfortunately, as you heard earlier this evening, the trust looked at it, met, reviewed it, and they basically walked away because they had the same issue. What do we do with the structure? So they walked away. At that point, we went back to the Board of Selectmen and said, look, the Housing Authority is not interested, the adjoining property is not interested, and then what do you want to do? And that's when the Selectmen directed me to go forward and saying the town will acquire it in full for general municipal purposes, negotiate a successful price, which I did to the board's directive, and then the question became, we now are here at town meeting saying we want to acquire this, and as you heard earlier, the board would then form a committee to determine what to do with the property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David Foley, Precinct 5. Through the moderator to the presenters, considering the interest in this property, which has gone back several months, has this property been inspected by someone competent to determine what costs might be incurred if there are issues structurally with the property or any potential, code violations or asbestos or any other issues that might come up as costs, which at this point might be unknown?
I believe the due diligence of the town so far, the DPW director and the town manager have walked through the property, but I don't believe that any cost analysis has been done as far as renovations or asbestos or anything else like that. I don't believe the town has done any of those yet.
Thank you.
An appraisal was done, actually, on the property.
Tom Newcomb, Precinct 9. Two quick questions. First off, with this property being assessed at about $540,000, so we're looking at how much of a tax bill that will be not
taken off the tax rolls
since if the town takes this over.
There is no.
That's right. Yeah, there are no taxes currently being paid on it because of the educational
because it is
use
an
of the
educational.
property.
Okay, that's what I thought. But what would the taxes be on it if it was sold in the public market?
Say somewhere in the $8,000 range, maybe John or someone else.
Is
can help. 8 to 9,000.
One of the options looked at being able to peel off the back property that we keep to the town? Is there access through the fields and sell the house similar to what we did up on Maple Street?
That's one of the things that we've discussed, and that's one of the options that we would discuss when we bring a committee together to look at the property. So it's one of the things we've considered.
Okay. Thank you.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. Question: when the property is inspected and certain things are required to upgrade the home because it's so old, is that not in fact a negotiation factor that you can play with before the final purchase of the home?
In this situation, where between the housing authority going back and forth and the town going back and forth, I think the Board of Selectmen negotiated this price in good faith that as long as town meeting approves it, that would be the price we move forward. I'm not sure we could go back to them at this point and try and renegotiate that. They were marketing this property for close to around the $540,000 price range when we got them to agree to the $490 figure. So it was well under what they were actively marketing this in the private market.
Right, but if in fact we run into a big surprise that normally is still a negotiation factor, that is a possibility.
Okay, I guess that's
Right.
a fair point. If we were to find something unforeseen, then I think that certainly would
Yeah,
open
so
up
so
negotiations.
there's really no worrying concern there. And even though that you don't have a plan, you do have several options you're starting to look at. Is that not correct?
That's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jerry Lowe, Precinct 9. My question is, how long has this been on the market? It's been on the open market?
Do you know when David Hedison ultimately? 6 or 8 weeks before we negotiated our price.
Okay, 'cause I'm just
Approximately.
surprised that there aren't just individual families that want to move in as a house. I mean, has there been any offers on it from that?
I don't believe there were any other offers before we put our offer in, but there were other people actively looking at it who had been through the property and who, as we heard, were talking to David Hedison at the time that we put in our offer and since then. So there has been a lot of activity, but ours was the first offer that we're aware of.
But it's the Merrimack Valley, whatever the educational co-op that is the owner now, right?
Correct.
So they're the ones that they can sell to whoever they want?
Correct.
Okay. And have they advertised it on the open market?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Precinct 9, I'd like to ask if now's an appropriate time to make an amendment to the motion.
I would wait. Wait until debate. We have to, I mean, you're the last one up there unless someone else gets up there.
Okay.
I would just ask the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen what their recommendations are, and then it would be appropriate. Does anybody else have any questions? We have one or more.
Let's put on the market on August 29th, just to clarify the last point.
It's Steve Flynn, Precinct 3. It seems like this property looks very, very nice on the screen here, and all these folks who have came in and looked at it, they passed on it. Now, if we purchase this property...
Do you have a question, sir?
Okay, the question is, what would happen if we get this property and we have to improve on it to make it, viable? Say we had to put $300,000 into it, which is not a lot of money today when you're going to an older home.
Right. Well, you asked a very legitimate question, and I think
Are
that...
you saying what if we had to put money into it? I think, depending on the uses that we come up with, we may likely have to put some money into it. I do think that's likely. But there may be, the town may have more options for this property given the surrounding land than someone who's just looking to live in it as a home. It may have more value to the town. I think that's how we saw it.
So the $500,000 could be a lot higher.
Well, the $490,000 is just the purchase price. The ultimate price that the town may, or cost that the town may incur may be higher depending on the use.
Okay.
That's correct if that's your question.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions? There being none, does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Yes, Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval.
Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommends approval.
Now, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Through you to Town Council, before I bring up the amendment, basically the intention of what I believe I'm going to read this to you now. The intention is to try and verbalize what we've discussed in terms of being able to have a committee review its use with appropriate representation by the precinct and come back to town meeting for recommendations. So would you like me to read that out here?
Hold on.
Do you have it? Okay, let's take a look, please.
So Bill Griffin is offering an amendment there. You've heard several of the speakers express concern that this
roughly 200-year-old building on this property be maintained in some form without worrying about it being raised. The building, to my eye in the aerial, has been added to. It probably didn't have that original shape or form, but it is in a kind of a spacious open lot. It's been pointed out it's sandwiched between the Russell Mill soccer fields and also the Russell Mill itself. I think this is one of those situations where the town is imagining that it is acquiring a nice piece of property and preserving it from being used for other things. We've heard several the proponents of the Board of Selectmen mentioning that because it has been on the market, it could be suitable as a 40B, that is a high-density housing development. Mill Road has already seen one of those. And in fact, I think we're going to get our next special town meeting warrant article will involve a sewer pump station on Mill Road to accommodate another housing development that's already going in on a Mill Road.
Okay, well, we have an amendment, and I will read it, but we will eventually get it on the screen, hopefully. And basically, they want to insert the following after the words general municipal purposes. So let me see if I can find that here for you.
If this is about forming a committee, we may want it to just be a friendly amendment.
6th line. Okay, so it would read, instead of after held for general municipal purposes, you're going to insert until such time as town meeting authorizes its use based upon recommendations of a MEC usage committee?
Right. I'm not sure if that was the appropriate language, Mr. Moderator, but it trying to refer to the establishment that currently has the building.
To be appointed by the Board of Selectmen and containing at least 2 Precinct 9 representatives. That's what you want?
Yes, sir. And I believe that the reason for this is I'd like to accurately convey the intent of what was discussed. We don't want to be overly restrictive on the purpose, but we do, much like as one of my esteemed colleagues has alluded to, we've done similar to this with the grinder pump study, and I think it's important that we go through the process, but that we were able to come back to the board and understand the town meeting, and understand what this use is with adequate input from the members of the precinct.
MEC usage. That seems. Yeah. I mean, Pat, we can maybe poll the boards and just see if that would be a friendly amendment. The Board of Selectmen did put forth this article. I think I would be in favor of that change.
Matt,
I see some heads nodding. I think we can accept this as a friendly amendment. Yeah, we'll accept this as a friendly amendment.
Okay, the only question I guess I would have is, do we want to put a number on the committee, or are you going to do that via just the Board of Selectmen? It already indicates 2 Precinct 9 representatives. I don't know how many.
If you leave it vague, I mean, at the discretion of the Board of Selectmen,
that's fine.
Maybe we will pick that number if that's okay.
Okay, so this is going to be treated as a friendly amendment, which does not require a vote.
But we take a vote.
Okay, so I guess we are going to vote on that as a friendly amendment. Before we vote, does anyone have any questions?
Mr. Moderator, if I could, there's been a couple of questions from the audience. The intention is not to, I'm not saying not to buy the property. What I'm trying to say is to have that committee study its usage and come back to report to town meeting, much like we did for Oak Hill and the grinder pumps.
Okay.
So it's to buy the
Yes,
property and have the committee form.
We can't read the amendment, so we don't know what the amendment says.
Well, I will repeat it again. I will read the entire article. Okay. I move that the town authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by purchase, gift, eminent domain, or otherwise, all or a portion of a parcel of land containing 1.77 acres more or less and the buildings thereon, which is located at 101 Mill Road, shown as Lot 15 on Assessor's Map 113, Block 431, and more fully described in a deed recorded in the Middlesex North Registry of Deeds in Book 2284, page 545. Said parcel to be under the care, custody, and control of the Board of Selectmen and held for general municipal purposes until such time as town meeting authorizes its use based upon recommendations of a MEC usage committee to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen and containing at least 2 Precinct 9 representatives, and further to transfer $373,762 from overlay surplus and $116,238 from the sale of real estate fund to fund said acquisition, including related appraisal, survey, and legal costs and other costs incidental and related thereto, and further to authorize the Board of Selectmen to take all actions necessary to acquire said parcel. Yes. Now's the time to ask questions about the amendment.
First of all, if we do purchase this property is going to have to be closed up and winterized to the cost of, what are we going to do with the property while we're waiting for this committee? I know I was on the Oak Hill committee, and that took a year.
Fran, you asked a great question, and then let's get an answer.
And the second question.
Well, let's answer the first question.
Okay. Well, it would certainly either have to be winterized. We haven't run the cost on that, or we'd have to keep the heat on. So I guess we would do an analysis of which of those two options would be cheaper to get us through the winter.
If the building were to remain vacant, we would have to purchase an insurance policy on a vacant building. To get an insurance policy on a building of this value and location, with vandalism coverage, we probably cost about $6,000. We then obviously have to monitor and keep an eye on the property. You don't want the pipes to freeze and so forth, so you've got 2 choices.
And you have a sump pump there.
Right, and I would recommend you not do that because you don't want to have a situation where you've got mold or other conditions in the building. So I think what we would do is the town would incur the expense and the effort of maintaining minimal heat in the building and periodically inspecting it with the facilities department to make sure that that there are no issues with the building and we don't want the pipes freezing and so forth. What we would also do is there is an alarm system in the building, so that would mitigate some of the hazards. But in essence, you're right, we would have carrying costs until such a use is determined for the property.
I thought I had heard all this at the last discussion of this. That's why I thought, am I hearing something different this time around as to the costs involved?
Is that a question you want us to answer?
One other question.
Go ahead.
The town is purchasing this?
Yes.
Why are we having 2 Precinct 9 town meeting members on this committee?
The proponent of the amendment will answer that question.
Well, I think we better think about that.
Got a Precinct 9 rep at your table, Fran.
Mr. Moderator, through
Yes.
you to the previous speaker, the reason for asking for Precinct 9 representation is because of the amount of development that is currently taking place within Precinct 9. For those folks who may recall some of the earlier activity in the summer, there's recently been a 40B that was just approved on the end of Mill Road. There's another one slated for Turnpike Road, and 150 feet behind my house, there are 500 units on their way from Billerica. This precinct is bearing quite a substantial influx of this type of activity, and much like the other committees that have been set up, I would like to have adequate representation in the right places. I believe the Oak Hill Study Committee had the right representation. We're not asking for anything out of line there, and I believe Selectman Hanson has already said that they would view this as a friendly amendment. I think they're keen to understand what our concerns are. They've heard them before, and we already know that this is an area that's had quite an influx. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peggy Dunn, Precinct 1. My question through you to the speaker, what is the time limit on this amendment? Because it says until such time as town meeting authorizes the use based upon recommendations from the selectmen. That could be 3 years. We don't know.
Well, does somebody, that's a question, does...
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see a time limit on this. I think the intent of this is to ensure that the Board of Selectmen can't act on this property without additional approval from town meeting at a future date. Are you suggesting that you would like a time limit on this?
Well, yes, because the amendment says until such time as you make up your mind what you're going to do with it. And you say, well, your intent is, do it quickly. But intent doesn't always work. For one thing and another, nobody agrees, you can't do that, we don't have money for this. This thing could go on forever.
Okay.
It's like buying a pig in a poke.
Okay, Peggy, we're on question and answer, I believe, so...
Mr.
Go ahead.
Moderator, I would be willing to entertain an amendment to change the time limit. The intention was to be somewhat expeditious and be involved about this. And I have to believe that if we can solve a grinder pump issue between the
Town Council
spring and
would
fall,
like to
we can
address
do
that.
the same.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I don't recommend putting a time limit on this. What's critical is, under the amendment, the land is going to be held for general municipal purposes
For a period of
under the jurisdiction of the selectmen, and that would continue on and on until this body takes a vote to change the purpose for which it's held.
So I'm willing to entertain a motion to amend it to a time limit of 1 year.
I do not recommend putting a time limit because it's going to create a contingency and an uncertainty in the future as to the status of this property. Being held for general municipal purposes is the right way to do this until such time as this body votes to use it for a different purpose.
I defer to your input.
Right. And as the presenter, I mean, if you're authorizing us to spend almost $500,000 to purchase this property and put a committee together, and we're paying to keep it heated and to keep the lights on, there's no reason for us to not bring this forward in the spring or fall or as soon as possible. I see no reason why we would just drag our feet.
Laura Merrill, District 2. For clarification, Mr. Moderator, as the board has already agreed to this, accept this as a friendly amendment, we don't need to vote on that?
No, we do, but it has to pass by a simple majority as opposed to the underlying article, which has to pass by 2/3.
I see.
Any additional questions?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, through you to the speaker. I know what your intent is. You've said that many times, but I still don't think that's a very good reason for me to purchase the property.
Peggy,
thank you.
That's argument. There was no question there. All right. Okay. So, there being no more questions, the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom haven't had an opportunity to review this, so we're just going to take a vote on the amendment. A yes vote will be to approve the amendment, which establishes a committee to be appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and a no vote would be to revert back to the original warrant article.
Again, because this is a friendly amendment, it only requires a simple majority. Looks like it's going to get that pretty easily, and so we'll move on to the main motion, which is to decide whether or not the town should purchase the property. Interesting, there are 6 abstentions, which I see at least 2 realtors in town who are not voting. And they might consider this a conflict of interest.
The amendment passes 95 in favor, 38 opposed, 6 abstentions. Now we will vote on the underlying warrant article, which requires a 2/3 vote.
Debate.
Oh, we didn't have debate on that yet, have we? Okay, so let's get to that. Yes, you may.
Just for clarification, you said, I was unclear on your answer as to the deal that's been negotiated is an as-is basis, and is there a home inspection contingency in there? You said no, and then you said yes, so I don't quite,
Sorry, I'm hearing from Paul that it was agreed as is.
as is.
As
So
is
whatever,
conditioned.
if there was any further inspection of the property and any lead paint, asbestos issues came up, that's it, as is.
Yes.
Thank you.
Joe Reddy, Precinct 3. You said that other developers were possibly interested in it. They had been speaking with David Hedison. How do the other projects that are going on in the area impact the ability for a developer to put any sort of development on that parcel?
Other projects in the area. Paul, do you want to speak to this maybe?
I didn't have the conversation with David Hedison. What I can tell you is my knowledge on the property is it's zoned residential. And the reason that the Merrimack Education Center is operating there is because they're a nonprofit educational use, which is allowed under the residential zoning under the State Zoning Act. There has been interest in the property by private parties, such as law offices and so forth. The problem is that's not an allowed use under our residential zoning in Chelmsford, and under the Chelmsford zoning bylaw, the town of Chelmsford does not allow use variances. And so, therefore, the only use that can take place under the current zoning would be residential or an exempt use under the Residential Zoning Act of the state, such as nonprofit, child care, and so forth. Other than that, then it would be the 40B risk, but as you're aware, we're in this certification period, and that could not happen until our certification expires next June. And also, this is not on the town's list of approved certified affordable housing locations, so that would be a little more of a defense to that type of development. But the bottom line is in speaking to the broker for the property, there has been some use. However, it's really been for type of professional office use, but again, that's not allowed by zoning.
Right. I'd just like to say that I think financially it's a poor decision.
Okay,
Oh, I'm sorry.
question and answer.
We're in debate.
Oh.
I just asked a question because
Okay.
I wanted to know
Go
before
for
I say
it.
this. But I think financially it's a poor decision to purchase this property because we're going to take this off the tax roll. People have been complaining about how they want to see tax.
Not on the tax roll.
Okay. Well, regardless, we're going to have operational costs for keeping it up. And I look at things like the Dutton House, things like the fire station, which we don't have uses for. We're going to have another building we don't have a use for. And I think financially it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try to purchase this building. We have to pay the cost of it. I would say we should have at least some sort of idea what we want to do with it before we go ahead and spend $500,000.
Mr. Merrill?
Mr. Moderator, George Merrill, Precinct 2. I'm also a member of the Chelmsford Historical Commission. Over the years, the last few years, we've been destroying on an average of 20 to 30 houses a year in this town. At that rate, some of these older homes are going to be gone, and you're changing the character of the town. We have a chance to buy this piece of property at a reasonable price. We should do that. We haven't inventoried it yet because this is newly a new thing we didn't really get into yet, but we need to inventory it. And if we find it's historically significant, we can hold up anybody doing anything with it for a year in the way of demolition. That's our demolition bylaw. So I think you should buy this. Anything can be restored. Check out my barn someday. But anyway, it could be restored, and there are many, many uses for it. And I'd like you to save a portion of our town and vote yes for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Doug Bruce from Precinct 9. I'd like to say that I believe this property has historic value, but it also has intrinsic value to the town beyond just the structure itself. It's situated between two marvelous pieces of property that are enjoyed by the town. I hazard to guess Hundreds of our children have played sports at the adjacent fields, and if anybody's tried to drive in and out of those fields are landlocked except for maybe a 20-foot right-of-way. Securing this property presents the town with options. And spending this money is an investment in protecting ourselves against unwanted development. We have as an amendment here, the idea that we as a body can guide the future development of this piece of property rather than lose the opportunity to guide the development of that property in the future. So I strongly urge everybody to appropriate this money. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Pat Magnell, Precinct 8. We've spent so much of this evening talking about spending smaller amounts of money in the pursuit of cleaning up a mess. And to be perfectly frank, I think it's refreshing to be able to speak in favor of this article as amended, where we can spend some money, where we can actually think big instead of think small. Once this opportunity is gone, it's gone. When you don't purchase a piece of property, you lose control. And that's the one thing I think we should not lose is control. And there are certainly, as the previous speaker just mentioned, plenty of things we can do with it. And hey, if worse comes to worse, we can always sell it, and I'll bet you we won't lose money. I just want to give you an example. I live in West Chelmsford, where just now the fourth of 4 proposed new houses is being constructed on a piece of land next to a baseball field abutting a railroad track. And I'm sure that at least one of the homeowners on that land, which we in the neighborhood used to think of as a piece of junk land, I'm sure they have at least 800 grand into that house. And this is not exactly a location I would consider comparable to that. This is an A-plus location. The amount of money seems big, but we should think big. Don't lose control, because once the opportunity is gone, it's gone, and we'll regret it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Hadley, Precinct 3. Couple of questions. Should we buy this, or should we commit to buying this land? Is the people that own it right now, are they going to be okay with us buying this land right now? I mean, are we going to have to actually pay for this land right now and then take complete charge of it? And then if we take a year before we decide what we're going to do with it, are we going to be in an okay position to actually sell that, through town meeting with no major problems? Or is there any potential that we're going to get to the year and then maybe not come up with a definite way to do this, and then be sitting here looking at each other like, why did we buy this land? I actually think it's a good idea to buy the land, but I'm just kind of wondering, a year down the road, what happens if we don't come up with something? Can we easily sell the land? And I assume we wouldn't have any control over who actually buys the land if we were going to sell it. Does that make sense?
In our discussions, negotiations with the property owner, the Merrimack Education Center, we basically agreed that if this were to go forward, approved by town meeting, we anticipated the closing in December of this year. At some future date, if the town wished to sell it, like in a year or some other point, then it would take a 2/3 town meeting vote to authorize the sale. And yes, there could be conditions imposed regarding the sale of the property in the proposal or offer that's put out. So yes, the town could have that right to impose conditions on the sale in terms of what it could be used for and deeds and so forth. But again, nothing can be sold without the 2/3 vote of town meeting.
But it does look feasible that if we did want to sell it in a year for whatever reason, we shouldn't have any major problem if we approve that sale. Then we have to find a buyer.
You have to get the 2/3 vote of town meeting to authorize that sale.
Right. Well, if we did get the 2/3 vote to sell it, then we have to find a buyer.
And we got to put out a request for proposals and then accept bids.
I'm just wondering how feasible that sounds right now.
It's doable.
It's doable.
What you got to assume is that
because
if you get the 2/3 voted tonight, well, you get 2/3 whatever time to sell it.
I like the idea of buying the land. I just want to make sure that a year down the road we're not locked into something that we don't know what to do with.
You just got to get the votes.
Laurie Myers, Precinct 6. Do we happen to know the appraised value of this property?
there had been 2 appraisals done on the property. One was done by the town, again, back in the late spring. That appraisal came in at $440,000. Then the property owner conducted their own appraisal, and their appraisal came in over $500,000. 2 differences. One is our appraisal was on the residential allowed use, and also we were using comparables that were available in the springtime. Their appraisal was done later, in which there were more recent comparables, and obviously the market had a spring uptick. And then second, they assumed that they could sell it for non-residential uses, such as the commercial uses that we described earlier, assuming that they could get that type of zoning approval. So yes, there were 2 appraisals. They were opposed, and then, like I said, we negotiated the price when David Hedison was there, and then we came back and negotiated another price later that reflected the market conditions at that time.
Thank you.
Bob Joyce, Precinct 1. I'd like folks to keep in mind that the $112,000 that comes out of the sale of property can only be used for certain things, and one of the things you can do is buy more property with it. And the remainder of it is coming out of the, where is that? I can't remember. The assessor's surplus, which was up to about $700 and some thousand recently, and then we asked the assessors if they would move some of that so it was available to use for other things. What it comes down to is this: if we vote affirmative on this, we can buy it and protect it. If we don't, it's gone, and we never go back there again. This has been yanking around for too long for these people from MEC, so hopefully you'll vote for it, and we'll have it as a town asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more discussion?
Tricia Duras, Precinct 1. I'm opposed to this article. We have too many buildings in town that we don't have uses for right now. The Dutton House has been sitting here after, 26 years? We haven't been able to resolve that. We've just got the Sovereign Bank that's sitting there vacant. We haven't been able to resolve that. We're going to soon have the fire station that we're going to have to deal with. It's a lovely piece of property. I hope that some resident comes along and decides that they want to invest in it for themselves. I cannot see spending almost $500,000 of town money to buy a piece of property that we have no use for. That's just how I feel. Thank you.
Any more discussion?
Tom Cristiano, Precinct 9. If somebody was going to go in there and redo that house and keep it the way it is, I'd be all for selling it. But I and many others in this room have had a lot of experience with 40Bs and 40B developers. On Mill Road, right on that same street, you go to the end, there's one that many in town were protesting. It's going to be 108 units on, I believe, a little under 5 acres. And you know how much many people in this room and many residents in that area tried to stop it. There was no way that they were able to stop it. Now, this land on this kind of a main road in a sense, I mean, a 40B developer would love this location. So if you look at it, it's just under 2 acres. If you take a proportion, if you could get 108 units, and these are apartments, on 5 acres, you could say proportionally somebody could come in there and build 40 apartments on this less than 2 acres. You look confused, John, but you see...
No, go ahead.
Okay, you got 108 units for 5 acres, about 40 units for a little under 2 acres. So think of that. We have this beautiful historic property next door, the mill. If we get 40 units on that hill right next to it, I don't think that's great for the town. Secondly, think of all the other residents on Mill Road and in Precinct 9 and in Precinct 4. I mean, haven't they suffered enough with 40Bs? I think they have. Now, the question that Paul brought up, well, we're getting close to the 10%, which is true, But my experience is, even if you get 10%, the 40B developers have so much control that they will be able to get it passed unless there's very extenuating circumstances. And I don't see where there would be the extenuating circumstances here. I think they could fight for a 40B there and get it. So I strongly urge everyone, if you can, to protect this land, first of all, from a 40B developer. Secondly, I think it's a nice piece of property. There could be community gardens back there, all kinds of things, parks, and we could find a good use for that property when this committee gets together. So I would urge everyone just to vote to purchase this property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tricia Duras, Precinct 1. I'm not a proponent of putting a 40B in a neighborhood, but I think it also sets a bad precedent for the town to go and purchase a piece of property in the fear that it might become a 40B. What happens if another piece of property in another neighborhood comes up for sale that could potentially be a 40B? We then get in the position of acquiring how many pieces of properties in town to prevent a 40B in a different neighborhood? I just, if you had a clear-cut use for the building, this would be a whole different conversation. But we can't just keep buying up property in town that we don't have the money for, that we really can't afford. We're right now talking about budget deficits when there could be other properties in other parts of town that would be in a similar situation. So as much as I appreciate the beauty of the property, it's been on the market, it's been on the open market. I just don't see that it should be a municipal issue to take this off to purchase it in the fear of a 40B coming there, or set the precedent for doing so.
Sue Danderoff, Precinct 9. I want to reiterate, you've heard a lot of Precinct 9 reps get up and speak today about the density of affordable housing in our precinct. Commercial development, we've seen from the 40Bs that are going on in Precinct 9, it's very difficult to stop. Nonprofit development, we've had conversations with some of the boards here in town, with our state reps, our state senators. There's very little within our town's jurisdiction to stop the nonprofits as well. And so I think I understand that there's concern about the uncertainty in budget. I understand there's concern about setting precedent. But I do think that this piece of property is a great piece of land in itself. And there's many uses for open space like that in town. It's very rare that you get a piece of land that's almost 2 acres in this town. And I think it's an important piece of land. I think the building has historic significance and there's options there. I commend the Board of Selectmen for coming forward with that uncertainty and bringing this to the town. I'm in favor of this article.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. On this piece of property, there were other properties that were cited that we don't have any use for and the town already owns, except none of these pieces of property are like this beautiful piece of property. You're talking about apples and bananas, not even apples and oranges. The parks that we have, the soccer fields, that is a very small, narrow, one-way, one vehicle down that path. If somebody else does purchase it, a developer, that whole system can change, and then the kids will no longer be able to be into our soccer fields anymore. That will be completely removed from them. But let's say that we do have to turn around and we do purchase it and we do sell it. And we do sell it to a lovely family. Well, when we do sell it, if that happens that way, we will be making a significant profit. There's no way the town or the town manager is going to let it go without a decent profit, because right now it is a significant price for this piece of property. So there isn't a fear of loss of money or even recuperating what it's going to cost to winterize the home. Although maybe you might think about having a groundskeeper who lives there to take care of the property, who you don't have to, they don't pay you rent and you don't pay them salary, and it takes care of everything. So definitely this piece is perfect for our town to acquire so we can have control. And those that don't live into our precincts of 4 and 9 do not understand or have not bear the burden of the high density and what we do deal with. And we do not want that to happen, and we cannot control if a developer comes in and they do want to do 40B. However, there is another way to go around that, and we will have proper plans and a plan system so we're not subject to just developers taking over 40Bs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam Polton, Precinct 8. We have an opportunity right now to end this town meeting on an extremely high note. I want to commend the Board of Selectmen and the manager for taking an action that is truly in the best interest of the town. The debate tonight shouldn't be about 40B or what could be or can't be. The debate should be on what is. And what we have here is an opportunity that only comes up once. The selectmen saw it, the town manager saw it, and I'm hoping that we as a town meeting will see it. The appraisal is proper. There was a low and a high. We're in the middle. It's a gorgeous piece of property. And a very wise amendment is making it so that before anything is done further, it's coming back to this board. Who could ask for anything more? We have the opportunity to use money that is set aside for this purpose. The selectmen agreed. They authorized the manager to negotiate. He did a great job. It's in front of us at a good price, and the use will be appropriate because we will decide what that use is. If we don't vote yes tonight, we will lose the opportunity to control, use, and enjoy one of the last large parcels in this part of town. I wish we could get more property such as this in this way. So I strongly urge everyone to vote this amended warrant, acquire this property. It's going to be looked back upon as one of the wisest things we did tonight. End on a high note, vote yes, and buy Mill Road. Thank you.
I'm sorry to take up a little bit more time. Tricia Doris, Precinct 1 again. Just a couple of more points that I'd like everybody to consider before they vote on this article. That although the other town-owned buildings that we don't have a use for are very different than this parcel, all of those buildings come with a cost. And that cost is in our operating budget. That cost comes on the backs of our facilities and maintenance departments. This is one more property that is then going to burden our already overtaxed facilities department, which is understaffed, under budgeted in my opinion. And again, if we're going to spend money on this on additional facilities that is going to require additional staff to maintain, then we're going to have to look to increase the municipal budget accordingly, because all of these things do come at a cost. And I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Hi, Jeff Apostolakis, Precinct 9. I'll make this very, very quick. I ask everybody to consider in favor of this article, because as you've seen over the past couple of months and years, if you take a look at the surrounding towns around Chelmsford, everybody's putting things on the borders and outlying borders of Chelmsford. As you can see on Mill Road, the 40B that happened down the end of Mill Road, the Bill Rick is putting in big units right off of Bishop Street. You take a look at the landfill up North Chelmsford, you take a look at the methadone clinics that are happening, all that kind of stuff. But you take a look at what's happening in the surrounding neighborhoods in Chelmsford, and all your surrounding towns are putting everything right around the borders of Chelmsford. I'm asking you, right, to support this article, preserve this land, right? And as Sam said, let's end on a positive note. I mean, if you know that piece of property well, I mean, it'd be a shame to let that get into the hand of a developer. I could see, I mean, we're talking about the school department, don't hold our kids hostage and everything like that. This is a beautiful piece of property that you could tie together with a historic mill on one side. You got beautiful soccer fields on the other side. You could put a nice park in the back there. It'd be a shame to let this slip into the hands of a developer, losing this piece of property. Let's start protecting the character of Chelmsford, not only in the center of Chelmsford, but in the outlying neighborhoods also. All right? We cannot sacrifice the outlying neighborhoods. Okay? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen Bowman, Precinct 4. And one last thing, this is also protecting it for the future generations to follow. This is not to be urbanizing everything and taking our lands away. We need to preserve, not just for ourselves, but also our future generations. Please remember that when you vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? There being none. You're going to be voting in, yes, it is to vote in favor of the amended motion, which includes the committee that will be appointed by the Board of Selectmen. A no is to not acquire the property. This requires a 2/3 vote. You can vote now.
It's looking like the interesting. Again, there's a couple of abstentions, but it looks like the 2/3 vote is assured. I have to say honestly, I'm surprised that we spent an hour on this particular article, because I think that there is a lot of options available to the town, even if this were to be purchased and somewhere down the road decided that it wasn't a good property. You can always sell it and recoup the money. In any case, it did pass.
94 in favor.
I think we're going to find this is the last article tonight. It's past 11 o'clock.
Just procedurally, what we have to do is we have to vote to continue the special town meeting to Thursday at 7:30. So if I can have a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Now I have to open up the regular town meeting, and we have to vote to continue that until after the special town meeting on Thursday. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you.
Wow. So as coming to an end is the apparently only the first half of the special town meeting. There were 4 articles on that. We got through 2 of them, and there are 2 more to go. One will involve a property on Katrina Road, and the other is a sewer pump. And then we get to the real tough, challenging articles having to do with the distribution of free cash, the dealing of the overage in the school department budget for this fiscal year, not just dealing with bills that went unpaid for last fiscal year. You've heard some new voices from town meeting reps. I haven't checked to see if these are people who just recently got elected, but I saw a handful of reps who really wanted to have their voices heard, and I guess good for them. In any case, this is going to be, for sure we're going to be here through all of Thursday night, and I wouldn't be surprised, given the tenor of the concern that you saw this evening with some of the things that have happened within the school committee and the public school administration, would not be surprised to see this extend to next Monday night. I think there are a lot of questions that are going to be asked this coming Thursday about what is exactly, who's mining the store, for lack of a better word, and it really is a shame that the forensic audit wasn't completed by now. Apparently there are numbers, but not a final report ready. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I have to say I got through my coffee early on. These ought to be a standard issue for these town meetings. I'll have another one full on Thursday night. I hope you'll join me then. So I'm Kelly Beatty for the staff of Chelmsford Telemedia. Thank you for joining us. See you Thursday.